The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Hello and a very good evening to this episode of Hayes Reviews. My name is Nick, I am the creator of the channel, and tonight we are live streaming another couple of chapters from the book The Next Million Years by Charles Galton, Darwin. So this is part 4. And we're well over halfway through the book now. We're making good progress. We'll probably wrap it up in the next couple of videos. But I want to extend a warm welcome to everybody who is tuning in live and those of you who are catching this on the replay. Do not forget, if you are catching this on the replay, then please take advantage of the pinned comment underneath the video in order to jump ahead to the section of the video that you are interested in. If you want to skip the introduction and ramble by yours truly, you may do so. No hard feelings. I understand. You can skip ahead to the reading. The timestamps are there in that pinned comment for you to use. So just a reminder to everybody, we have got Frank, join the internet. That wasn't an instruction to you, Frank, to join the internet, as obviously you're already on it. Join the internet is a separate person. So we've got Frank, comma, join the internet, Gwen, SD, and LJ in the chat tonight. So I'm extremely glad to have you all here. That's on YouTube. Looks like we got crickets on the other platforms that we're streaming to at the minute. That's all well and good. Sometimes people just like to wallflower and sit in and soak it up without getting involved. That's fantastic. That's historically what I used to do until I started finding my voice and gaining the confidence to speak out to other people and explain to them about these nuggets of history, these aspects that are overlooked and neglected in our educational systems and in our mainstream sources of news and information. They don't tell us about this long and deep history of eugenics. They don't tell us about families of great power and influence, such as the Rockefellers, such as the Rothschilds. There are so many aspects of history which are hidden, but they're not even really hidden. They're just not handed to us through the television. But if you go and buy a few books and spend a few pounds or dollars, dig around, rummage around in secondhand bookshops near you, you can find all manner of tasty little treasures that will elucidate and enlighten you and tell and show you that there is a very real legacy in the world of people with immense power and influence and wealth who are basically hell-bent on doing a lot of harm. And it's really only by reading those books, digesting the contents, and then communicating those contents to other people that we can raise awareness and maybe steer things in a different direction. And so it took me a while to find my voice and find my confidence to speak up and say something. And that is really what led to the creation of this channel. And so that's what I'm doing now, is live streaming and making videos where we just get into the books and have a look at what these people wrote about. And it is quite startling and shocking in many cases what we can unearth by just taking a bit of time to slow down and take a break from all the distracting nonsense that is channeled our way constantly, and just dive into the pages of a book. And as you can see, I have many books, and I'm continuing to expand and grow my collection because I'm very concerned that this kind of information, this sort of knowledge is going to be buried, it's going to be sidelined, and as we sort of careen headfirst into the era of artificial information, AI in other words, where audio and video can be faked using software, where we don't even know what we can believe anymore. If it's digital media, then it can be manipulated and made to be extremely believable. But do you know what cannot be altered and forged in such a way? Well, a book that was published in 1953, for example. And I can tell it was published then because it smells like it was published in 1953. It's kind of damp and musty. It has that sort of energy and aura to it, like a book that has been around, that is older than my parents, for example. So the book's been around a while. It's seen a few things. It's passed through many hands, sat on many shelves, and it has gathered a bit of force. And, it's, to my mind, quite an artifact, quite an incredible piece of technology. I'm not so impressed with the latest smartphone device or the latest piece of software, the latest console, all that stuff. They're just variations on a theme. They're just re-releasing the same piece of technology, just with a few bells and whistles added to it. But a book, that is an impressive piece of technology to me. And it's incredible that we can buy them for so cheap and we can get hold of them and we can learn from them. And in doing so, it stretches our mind. It forces us to think and pay attention. And it's like a workout for your mind. So if you go to the gym or you like to do exercise of any kind, maybe long walks or runs or bike rides, lifting weights, maybe you do something a little more risky and dangerous like, contact sports, maybe wrestling or doing jiu-jitsu. All that stuff is really good for the body. And we all know the importance of keeping the body healthy by regularly exercising it and putting it through a bit of strain and working up a sweat. Well, reading books does the same for the mind, and it keeps your mind sharp and it helps you learn new ideas, new words. And as I said earlier, it deepens your understanding of reality and gets you in touch with actual reality rather than a lot of this media that we consume thoughtlessly throughout the day by scrolling on our phones and switching on our social media app of preference and just letting the social engineers get straight into our subconscious and play with it without our awareness. And not only do we do it ourselves, but we allow our children to do it And you only need to go to a busy place, a busy street, maybe a shopping center or a city center or a town square of some sort. And you can just see how zombified everybody is because they're all walking around just ogling and fondling their little black mirror screen devices. And so what I try and do on this channel is say, okay, let's take a break from that. Let's look at books. Let's do some reading and try and readjust the way we spend our attention, because I think there is a lot to be gained by doing so. So with that said, I do have a little bit of a preamble prepared for you this evening, and I will just welcome Hasdak and Adam as well, who've joined us in the chat on YouTube. So welcome to you. So I do have a little preamble prepared for you this evening. Let's go right over to that. If I click this button here. Yeah, so the first thing is, if at any point you feel so moved to exchange value for value, if you're finding value in the presentations and the channel and the work that I'm doing here, then please feel free to send some value my way. There's a few different ways of doing that. You can donate on PayPal and buy me a coffee. You can support me monthly by signing up on Patreon and Subscribestar. You could super chat on Streamlabs or Entropy. But if none of those things are an option for you, no problem. You could just watch along on YouTube, Rumble and Odyssey, sign up and subscribe there, leave a comment, thumbs up, a like, all that stuff helps immensely. You can also connect with me on Telegram, Instagram, and Twitter, where I post a variety of different things, some useful links, some good documentaries, things that I find interesting, and also announcements as to when I'm going to live stream and go live. And if you use it and you want to, you can also send me some crypto. That's at the bottom there. So all that is to be found on allmylinks.com/HazeReviews. And I would appreciate it very much if you're able to throw a few pounds or dollars or shekels my way. It helps immensely because this work is kind of time consuming and I love doing it, but it does take up a bit of time out of my day. And nobody likes to work for free. All right, let's get into tonight's preamble ramble. And we're going to start by talking about the Invisible College. Okay. Sorry, for a second there, I thought I had muted myself, so I hesitated. But yeah, just thank you to Adam, who sent me a lovely email earlier this week, and he asked if we could do a little more of a focus in one of the preamble rambles on Invisible College. So here it is, and I appreciated the reminder because it had slipped my mind that this had a link to the book that we're reading about. So Charles Galton Darwin, he was educated in the kind of elite schools that the members of the royal family go to, and he was also involved in the Royal Society. Okay, so the Royal Society is the oldest group of scientific. What would you call it? Like a forum? The oldest. It's over. What would it be? 400 years old now, and it's been continuously running. And we had a look at that on the first video, part 1 of this series, and we looked a little bit into the origins, and we found that it was based on this thing called the Invisible College. And I said, that is a curious name. Why are they invisible? And what is the college up to? And why does it need to be invisible? It sounds very much like a secret society of some kind. It sounds very much like it is up to no good. Right, because what's the first thing people think of doing if they get the power of invisibility? Well, usually it's go and steal something, or go and hang out in the girls' changing rooms, or get up to some sort of mischief, right? So why are you invisible? Why you don't want people looking at you? You want to stay off people's radar and operate in the shadows, okay? So it's a strange name to have for yourself. And to those of us who like to learn about history, particularly the occulted aspects of history, or the parts of history which deal with conspiracy and secret societies and the machinations of small groups and powerful groups to control and influence the masses, something like the Invisible College is sure to pique our interest. And so let's have a little look at the Wikipedia article. It tells us that it's a term used for a small community of interacting scholars who often met face-to-face, exchanged ideas, and encouraged each other. Oh, isn't that nice? They're patting each other on the back and saying, well done, you go for it. You get out there and do your thing, break a leg. So they're giving each other encouragement. And this is one group that has been described as a precursor to the Royal Society of London, consisted of a number of natural philosophers around Robert Boyle and Christopher Wren. And we're going to have a little look at these two people in a moment. The background is the concept of invisible college was mentioned in German Rosicrucian pamphlets in the early 17th century. So I'm not diving into Rosicrucianism today. That's going to have to be another intro video. Perhaps, Adam, you can remind me at some point to do that one. But today we're not looking at that. But it's worth bearing that in mind, because the Rosicrucians, they pop up a lot when we're trying to learn about this hidden history and the occulted history. I don't know that too much about them, but it's going to be a good opportunity to learn, definitely. But one thing I do quite like is this image here, which maybe we'll have a look on in a minute after we've read the article. Connection with Robert Boyle and the Royal Society. Much has been made of an invisible college in London of the late 1640s. Revisionist history has undermined earlier narratives. So that's quite a tantalizing sentence there, basically saying that the earlier narratives, the stories we were given, at first, initially, with regard to this invisible college, have been undermined by historians who came later, unearthed connections and evidence, and pieced together a more accurate, more likely version of events. So revisionism can often get a bad name in the present day, because people who question certain historical events, certainly the one that it's illegal to question, they get slapped with this label revisionist, and they get sort of dismissed and poo-pooed as right-wing extremists and conspiracy theorists, right? But you would think that history would be open to revisionism as new information is made available, particularly with regard to classified documents, that when governments and military organizations and three-letter agencies make documents available to the public after 30, 40, 50, 60 years of them being classified, then you do have to go back and look at events through the light of new information, data, and evidence as it occurs, right? So revisionism and history should go hand in hand, and there should be a constant process. But unfortunately, as we know, history is written by the victors, and it is a tool, and it is often filled with propaganda and weaponized in order to, well, what did Orwell say? Control the past, control the present, control the past, and control the present, you control the past, you control the future. I think that's how it goes. Correct me on that if I messed that up. But you know what I mean, right? So revisionist history, yeah. Join the Internet says, first time hearing about this concept. If you whack it into a search engine and just see what comes up, you might find positive examples. My experience has been that it's often negative examples, right? People, I think the powers that be, or shouldn't be, they kind of want to put a narrative out there and say, this is it, it's settled, like the science is settled, history is settled, and it will never change, and that's that, okay? But then you get YouTubers coming along like Archaics, who dives into the oldest books and that he can get his hands on, and that paints a very different picture when you're actually looking at books written in the 1800s, for example. That picture is largely dissonant with the picture we are given. So yeah, revisionist history. Interesting to see it pop up here. And it just says, has undermined earlier narratives, without really giving us much of an insight into what has been undermined exactly and what has been revealed in the present. But anyway, we'll learn a little bit more about Robert Boyle as we move forward. So detailed evidence. In letters in 1646 and 1647, Boyle refers to, quote, our invisible college, or, quote, our philosophical college. The society's common theme was to acquire knowledge through experimental investigation. So acquiring knowledge, this could suggest to us maybe it's a sort of Gnostic effort. Gnostic and Gnosticism having a similar root to the word knowledge. Gnostic, Gnosticism, knowledge, knowing, gnosis. These are all sort of connected. And the key thing is this experimental investigation. So one of the reasons why this is very relevant to our study of the Charles Galton Darwin book is, as I mentioned in an earlier, maybe the first or second video, I think the first, is this idea of scientism as a religion, which we're kind of living in the present day. One of the major religions of the modern world is scientism, and we know this when people say, I believe in science, and I will trust the science, and I have faith in our scientists, and they use religious language, faith-based language, to describe something which is scientific and is supposed to be free of superstition and spirituality and God and demons and angels and all this all these concepts and entities and ideas which cannot be measured and seen, and you can't sort of get them under a microscope and prove they exist. Okay, excuse me a second. I just need to clear my throat. So I mentioned scientism as a religion, and that's a key part of the ideology of the type of people like Francis Galton Darwin, who push very heavily the notion that human beings are merely animals. And in fact, the chapter we're going to read tonight is called Mankind, a Wild Animal. I think it's Man, the Wild Animal, I think the chapter is. Let me just double check that. Man, a wild animal. That's the chapter tonight. So this scientism, this rationalism, this materialism, the only thing that exists is what can be measured and proven by the scientific method, and anything else is to be disregarded and forgotten about. Things like metaphysics, things like theology, anything that is not rooted in the five senses, then we have to sort of just poo-poo it and disregard it as superstition. So that's the modern day scientism. But when you go back and you start looking at these kinds of groups like the Invisible College here, we actually find a different picture, a different thing going on. So that'll become clearer what I mean by that when we look at Robert Boyle. But yeah, experimental investigation, they started to come up to decide that, okay, well, let's design experiments and test our ideas and our hypotheses about what's going on. And then there's other groups as well, like this one, the Hartlib Circle, which was a far-reaching group of correspondents linked to Hartlib, who was an intelligencer. And I never heard that word before, intelligencer. It just means like a spy. It doesn't really tell us much if we click on it. It just told me that it means spy. And they were interested in alchemy, among other matters. So alchemy, you probably have an idea of that as a kind of old school, mystical, not modern practice, right? And so, but it's interesting that the people who founded the Invisible College, which was the precursor to the London Society, the Royal Society of London, it's interesting that they were in alchemy. They were into alchemy. So I find that quite curious, and just wanted to highlight that. Because it highlights one of the things, it shows us one of the things that have been sort of disregarded and thrown by the wayside. Alchemy is not a sort of respected science anymore. You can't go to university and get a degree in alchemy, for example, right? It's been kind of abandoned. Another couple of groups here I haven't read these two articles, so that might be time for another preamble ramble. But there's the Hartlib Circle, and there is also the Gresham College and the formation of the Royal Society. So those two might be worth diving into. Not on this video, though. And then the modern use of the Invisible College is that it's been mentioned by Dan Brown in the Lost Symbol book. Those of you who are aware of, whoa, look at that picture of Dan Brown. Oh, no, that's Terry Pratchett, sorry. Yeah, that's exactly how I expected Terry Pratchett to look. Dan Brown, he wrote the Da Vinci Code and was kind of making a lot of waves with his fiction that sort of tied into conspiracy and a rewriting of history. So The Lost Symbol is a book by him, and it mentions the Invisible College. And then also Foucault's Pendulum by this gentleman, Umberto Eco. So it's been referenced in pop culture. Terry Pratchett as well, and also The Invisibles, which is a comic book series by Grant Morrison. So it's kind of it's been used in fiction. But as with fiction, as with a lot of fiction, there's often some truth to it and in there as well, isn't there? And let's have a look at this picture. Check that out. So this is the emblematic image of a Rosicrucian college, and there is so much going on in this picture, and I am way underqualified to comment on it all and say anything about it. But look at it. It's just craziness. You got like a sort of winged bit of, that looks like, what's that language? It looks familiar. It looks like the I don't know. Somebody might know in the chat. Stick it in the chat if you recognize that language. But there's a hand coming down out of the cloud. There's wings on this sort of bell tower. It's got a drawbridge, but the tower itself is on wheels. It says Venite Digni over the door. There's arms coming out of the building with a sword. There's an arc on a mountain in the background. This is one of the most interesting pictures I've ever seen, but I'm going to have to find somebody or somewhere explaining what all this is about, because it is just bonkers stuff. Very, very interesting, though. Yeah, SD says it's very Masonic. Record Deepness says alchemy, ? They call it chemistry now. Well, I'm very glad you said that, because you are preempting where we are going next on this preamble ramble, which is Robert Boyle. So Robert Boyle, he was an Anglo-Irish natural philosopher, chemist, physicist, alchemist, and inventor. So chemistry, alchemy, same thing or different thing? I mean, this guy was a chemist and an alchemist, so I'm not sure. But, the word chem is in there, isn't it? Chemist, chemist. So there's got to be a difference between the two. Or if alchemy became chemistry, why did they rebrand it, and what was behind that rebranding? Did the practice and the ideas remain exactly the same? I don't think so, because in alchemy there's this idea of changing metals, right? And I think they've kind of accepted that's not possible now in modern chemistry. But anyway, Boyle, this guy, Robert Boyle, he was the first modern chemist, or he's generally regarded as the first modern chemist, and one of the founders of modern chemistry. And he was a pioneer of the modern experimental scientific method, and he's best known for Boyle's law. Now, just a moment on the scientific method. This is what I was saying in the first video, scientism, believing in science, trusting the science, and worshipping the white lab coat people who have clipboards and graphs. That's a different thing to applying the scientific method yourself as a ways to discovering knowledge and to testing hypotheses and this kind of thing, right? So the scientific method is one thing. Scientism and a belief in scientism is another thing. And Scientology is a completely different thing, which we're not talking about at all today. But Robert Boyle, pioneer of modern experimental scientific method, creator of Boyle's Law, he was a devout and pious Anglican and is noted for his writings in theology. So that was a key point that I wanted to raise here. Because nowadays, scientism and materialism has largely discounted God. And in fact, a lot of the pop scientists who they roll out in front of us kind of disregard and laugh at and poo-poo the idea of intelligent design or creationism or there being a God at all. There was a video recommended to me on YouTube recently. It was Neil deGrasse Tyson talking to the Selfish Gene guy, Dawkins, having a question. I didn't watch it, but I could tell. But the title of the video was "Were We Designed?" I think that was it. I think it was "Were We Designed?" So you just know they're going to be saying, no, we're not designed, and anyone who thinks there was an intelligent design is a moron, because that's the angle those two guys always take. That's their role to play. But interesting that the founder of modern chemistry and the pioneer of the modern experimental scientific method was a devout and pious Anglican and noted for his writings in theology. Okay, so this is what I was saying about when you go back, you see that the origins of these things, there's been a change and a schism. Because nowadays, a lot of scientific rationalists would probably see a belief in God or religious affiliation of any kind as quite antagonistic with their scientific rationalist worldview. Okay, biography. As a child, he was raised by a wet nurse, as were his brothers. Boyle received private tutoring in Latin, Greek, and French, and when he was 8 years old, so he was learning Latin, Greek, and French before he was 8. That is a hell of an education. What's this idea about, give me a child from being born up to 7 and I'll give you the man, right? If you are getting Latin, French, and Greek before you are 8 years old, that is setting you up for life, I think, to be an incredibly well-rounded thinker and able to read and learn and make great strides with your understanding of the world. Following the death of his mother, he and his brother were sent to Eton College in England. So that's kind of the top-level college where all the upper crust, nobility, royalty, political elite tend to go to study. His father's friend was the provost of the college. So pretty connected, very much in the inner circle of influential, wealthy people who get to, do all the good stuff with all the money and the wealth. After spending over 3 years at Eton, he traveled abroad with a French tutor. So he he learned multiple languages, the classic languages, before he was 8. He was then sent to Eton College, and he also went traveling abroad with a French tutor at a very young age. So what an upbringing, what a life this gentleman had. So you can really probably see how that will account for his ability to think and write and reason and be so creative and fruitful in his works, right? So the middle years, so that was just all in his early life. The middle years, Robert devoted his life to scientific research and soon took a prominent place in the band of inquirers known as the Invisible College, who devoted themselves to the cultivation of the, quote, new philosophy. They met frequently in London, often at Gresham College, and some of the members also had meetings at Oxford. So there, we shouldn't be surprised to see this University Oxford popping up. It pops up all the time when we're studying these sort of elite families and these elite bloodlines, the Huxleys, the Galtons, the Darwins, often going to Oxford and studying there, right? The Boyles family coat of arms is displayed at All Souls in Oxford University. And then in 1654, Boyle left Ireland for Oxford to pursue his work more successfully. Among the critics of the views put forward in Boyle's book, which was New Experiments Physico-Mechanical, touching the spring of air and its effects, this Jesuit, Francis Lyne, was criticizing the contents of that book. And it was while answering his objections that Boyle made his first mention of the law that the volume of a gas varies inversely to the pressure of the gas. This is very interesting to me. This is Boyle's law. Nice little diagram on the screen there, if you hover over it. Because it reminded me of the first chapter in the Charles Galton Darwin book, where he talks about a gas in a container, the molecules of gas in a container, being like the humans on the Earth. Now, we know that the Earth is a ball, globe shape, and it's spinning endlessly through a void. And so my question, my sort of thing that bends my mind is how the atmosphere on the face of the planet doesn't get sucked off into the vacuum of space. Maybe I've watched too many aliens films, where they crack the window and then the vacuum of space just sucks all the air and all the furniture in the room and all the humans, and sometimes the aliens get blasted out into space because of that. But that doesn't happen with the surface of the planet, right? It's just mind-blowing to me. It's incredible. So sometimes I've heard people say that this Boyle's law is a proof or an example of how our world is not what it is, what we are told it is, the model I just described. And in fact, maybe it's something else, because how can you have air pressure without a container for that gas to be inside of? Okay? I'm just asking questions. I'm just throwing things out there, things I've heard that make you go, as the song goes, right? So just interesting that link between the Boyle's law and this person we're looking at and reading about now, Robert Boyle, as one of the founders of the modern chemistry and the scientific method of the Invisible College, which became the Royal Society of London, which Charles Galton Darwin was a member of. Interesting that his law that he discovered, that he's known for, that he has his name on, ties in very closely to that first chapter and that metaphor, that analogy, I should say, that Charles Galton Darwin used in his book. Curiouser and curiouser, I think you will agree. So, in 1663, the Invisible College became the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge, and the Charter of Incorporation granted by Charles II of England named Boyle a member of the council. In 1680, he was elected president of the society, but declined the honour from a scruple about oaths. So Robert Boyle had a problem with taking an oath, which is interesting, and that stood out to me as well. Because this guy actually does sound like a good guy. He sounds like he's got his ethics and morals and integrity in the right place, in the right orientation. So he didn't want to take an oath. You have to take, what's an oath for, Is it usually for a secret society of some kind? I think the Freemasons have an oath when you join. You have to proclaim your loyalty to the group and that you will help out a brother or a fellow Freemason if they ever need it, above anybody else in any other requirement, your job, your family, your community, you know, the brotherhood of the Freemasons go first. I'm not a Freemason. I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying I've seen it described that way. And that's kind of what I think of as an oath. It's like an oath of loyalty. It's a promise. It's a promise that you can't break. It's something that if you break, there will be consequences, right? And he didn't want to take an oath. He was like, no, thank you. I would rather not be the president of the Royal Society of London, which has just been incorporated by Charles II. I'd rather turn that down than take an oath. So quite powerful and suggests a man of integrity to me. He made a wish list of 24 possible inventions, which included the prolongation of life and potent drugs to alter or exalt imagination, waking, memory, and other functions, and appease pain, procure innocent sleep, harmless dreams, etc. And a lot of other things as well. Perpetual light, making armor and making extremely hard and light armor, a ship to sail with all winds, and a ship not to be sunk. And then it says here that all but a few of these 24 wish list inventions have come true. So he was definitely on a right track with his studies and his thinking and his ideas about what could be possible in the future with more experimentation and knowledge gained, right? So contrasts a little bit with Charles Galton Darwin's predictions about the future. Sounds like he either knew what was being worked on and would come down the line, or maybe he just was very good at seeing where things might go and had a bit of a predictive quality to his understanding of the world. In 1668, he left Oxford for London, and he resided at the house of his elder sister, Catherine Jones, or Lady Ranelagh. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. So this is interesting, right? This is 1668. And these siblings maintained a lifelong intellectual partnership, but his contemporaries widely acknowledged Catherine's influence on his work, but later historiographers dropped discussion of her accomplishments and relationship to her brother from their histories. What's going on there? He left Oxford for London. He moved in with his sister. They had a lifelong intellectual partnership. They shared medical remedies. They promoted each other's ideas and edited each other's manuscripts. And then historiographers dropped discussion of her and their relationship from their histories. Like, he lived with her for 20 years. So that's strange. I don't know what's going on there, what the story is behind that. But there's a podcast here if you want to know a little bit more about his sister. And that's entitled The Almost Forgotten Story of Catherine Jones. So in later years, in 1669, his health began to fail, and he got worse in 1691, and he died that year on the 31st of December. And he died just a week after the death of his sister Catherine, in whose home he had lived and with whom he had shared scientific pursuits for more than 20 years. Boyle died from paralysis. Curious. Strange. He doesn't explain why he died. Just his health began to fail. His health got worse. He died from paralysis. So, and yeah, I don't know. Just this move, going to live with his sister, working so closely with her being dropped from the histories, and then him dying there, kind of seems like a strange end, doesn't it? But we got a bit of info about him as a scientific investigator. It says he was an alchemist, and he believed the transmutation of metals to be possible. He carried out experiments in the hope of achieving this. He was instrumental in obtaining the repeal in 1689 of the statute of Henry IV against multiplying gold and silver. So Henry IV put a statute out saying, don't you multiply gold and silver. And he had some sort of part to play in getting that repealed. And Frank's just come to the rescue with a correct pronunciation of Lady Ranelagh. That's Lady Ranelagh, his sister, Catherine Jones, Lady Ranelagh. Thank you for that, Frank. Appreciate it. So, interesting. He was very interested. He wanted to multiply gold and silver. He managed to get that statute overturned and repealed. It tells us as well that he studied the chemistry of combustion and of respiration, and he conducted experiments in physiology where, however, he was hampered by the tenderness of his nature, which kept him from anatomical dissections, especially vivisections, though he knew them to be most instructing. And again, another curious admission on the Wikipedia article here. This word in particular, hampered, right? So he's saying, do you know what? I'm not so comfortable with vivisections and dissections. Probably something to do with his religious beliefs, the sanctity of life, the value of living sentient beings and their bodies, and not wanting to desecrate them afterwards. Then Wikipedia says this hampered his just that he was hampered by having a tenderness of his nature. I thought that was quite telling and sort of revealing of the kind of attitude. And, to me, that sounds like George Bernard Shaw, or maybe Sidney Webb, Beatrice Webb, maybe Charles Galton, Darwin. Like, having a tenderness of nature is going to hold you back, and it's going to get in your way, and it's going to become a liability. And actually, it would be more rational and productive and profitable for you to be ruthless and cunning, right? That's the kind of implication of that, the use of that word there. So, but again, it speaks to the quality of his character, the type of person he was, that he was very uncomfortable, and he had a tenderness of nature, and he was very uncomfortable with dissecting and vivisection of animals. And then lastly, we get to his theological interests. Boyle incorporated his scientific interests into his theology, believing that natural philosophy could provide powerful evidence for the existence of God. He criticized contemporary philosophers such as René Descartes. Boyle argued that natural philosophers could use the design apparently on display in some parts of nature to demonstrate God's involvement with the world. Throughout his career, Boyle tried to show that science could lend support to Christianity. When I was reading this bit, I started to think, maybe this is why he was sickly, because he started getting sick and his health started to fail in his 40s, and then he moved into his in with his sister, and then sort of stayed there living like a hermit, working with her until he died 20 years after that. So he died in his 60s, and I thought it was just curious to me, just kind of a red flag that he ended up having this sort of life, despite, given his views and how he was very much trying to unite scientific practice and study and knowledge with spirituality, and specifically with his Christian religion. That sounds like the kind of thing. So just very worth being aware that is the root. That is where the Invisible College and the Royal Society of London began. Okay, with someone who was trying very hard to prove the existence of God using science and scientific method, and had this tenderness of nature, this refusal to take oaths to certain societies. Right. So I was thinking like, it all looks good for this guy, until I got to this last bit here, which says, as a director of the East India Company, he spent large sums promoting the spread of Christianity in the East, contributing liberally to missionary societies and to the expenses of translating the Bible into various languages. So I was like, oh dear, that's a shame. It was going so well for old Boyle here, Robbie Boyle, until it turns out he was an East India Company director. And that's a shame, because they were pretty evil on the whole, weren't they? The East India Company. But you can't do everything. You can't get everything right, can you? But he personally financed the printing of the Bible in both the Old and New Testaments in Irish. So those of you in the audience who are from Ireland, then you might have Robert Boyle to be thankful to for that, for you being able to read the New Testament and the Old Testament in Irish. He also had a monogynist perspective about race origin. So I thought this was quite curious too. I'd never heard this word monogenism, monogenesis, or monogynist. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. But he was a pioneer in studying races, and he believed that all human beings, no matter how diverse their physical differences, came from the same source, Adam and Eve. So that's quite interesting too, I thought. In his will, Boyle provided money for a series of lectures to defend the Christian religion against those he considered, quote, notorious infidels, namely atheists, deists, pagans, Jews, and Muslims, end quote, with the provision that controversies between Christians were not to be mentioned. So these are called the Boyle Lectures, and that is something we'll have to look at on another video, because I didn't get a chance to prepare that for this one. But I bet they'd be good to read. and I quite liked his listing of notorious infidels there. It was quite funny, gave me a bit of a chuckle. But yeah, devout Christian, also the father of the modern scientific method. So I think, this is what a lot of atheists, a lot of people who disregard the spiritual aspect of reality, they'll say, well, I don't believe in spirituality. I believe in science. And it's just kind of like, yeah, well, Robert Boyle, the father of the scientific method, was a devout, a devout Anglican, and he believed in God. And in fact, he went to great lengths to fund the translation of Bibles and to unite science and make it prove Christianity. And what do you think about that, you atheist, scientific, materialist, worldview type person? And they won't like that question, I don't think. So he's got a number of important works, quite a lot, in fact, and some awards and honors as well. So I didn't know much about this guy before I read this article, and now I'm very glad that I did read it, and I would like to learn more because he sounds like a very interesting fellow indeed. So that's Robert Boyle. So if you remember, we started off looking at the Invisible College, and it said it was a number of natural philosophers around Robert Boyle and Christopher Wren. So the next guy we're going to look at is this Christopher Wren, who's over here. Now, I didn't find anywhere near as much interesting stuff on Christopher Wren's Wikipedia article, but it's worth going over it, and we can contrast it a little bit with Robert Boyle. So he was one of the most highly acclaimed architects in the history of England. He was accorded responsibility for rebuilding 52 churches in the city of London after the Great Fire in 1666, including what is regarded as his masterpiece, St. Paul's Cathedral. And St. Paul's Cathedral is absolutely stunning. It is an unbelievable piece of work and an incredible testament to what people in the past could do and were willing to do and were able to do and could envision and set their minds to accomplishing, versus what we in the present day are completely lacking and unable to get done. We can't do anything like this in the present day. And if the will and the knowledge and the skill and the imagination is there, then it is not being utilized for something such as this. And it is a majestic, incredible building. It really is. It's just incredible. So worth, if you're ever in London, go and have a look at that. And I didn't know it was Christopher Wren who was behind, the building or the design of that. So that was a good thing to learn. Christopher Wren, was educated in Latin and Aristotelian physics at Oxford again. Surprise, surprise. Wren was a founder of the Royal Society, and he was the president 1680 to 1682. So the first thing we got to think there, he was the president for 2 years. So we know straight away that this man has absolutely no problem making oaths. Okay. Compared to Robert Boyle, who was like, no, thank you, not so comfortable with the oath. This fellow, Christopher Wren, was like, yeah, sign me up, that's good. And his life and works, he was the only surviving son of Christopher Wren the Elder and Mary Cox. He had a lot of siblings who died in a very early age. The family became well off because of his mother, Mary Cox, who inherited her father's estate. He had a private tutor and his father teach him at home. And his father was appointed as the Dean of Windsor in 1635, and his family spent part of each year there, but little is known about Wren's life at Windsor. Also, little is known of Wren's schooling thereafter. So what I noticed reading this article is that there's a bit of mystery, a bit of uncertainty around his childhood and his upbringing. Nowhere near as much confident detail as we got when we learned about Robert Boyle. Some of Wren's youthful exercises preserved or recorded, though few are datable, showed that he received a thorough grounding in Latin and also learned to draw. On the 25th of June, 1650, Wren entered Wadham College, Oxford, where he studied Latin and the works of Aristotle. He became closely associated with John Wilkins, the warden of Wadham. The Wilkins Circle was a group whose activities led to the formation of the Royal Society. So we've got the Wilkins Circle. So this is like the third group that we've heard mention of, not including the Invisible College, that led to the formation of the Royal Society. So quite a few different groups fed into this organization known as the Royal Society. He received his MA in 1653. He was elected Fellow of All Souls College. Among these were a number of So in the same year, he began an active period of research and experiment in Oxford. Among these were a number of physiological experiments on dogs, including one now recognized as the first injection of fluids into the bloodstream of a live animal under laboratory conditions. How about that? What a hot topic for this day and age. And remember, in the book, Charles Galton Darwin told us that he was predicting injections, hormonal injections that would alter the intellect and morality of individuals. Yeah. So remember, he was a member of the Royal Society, and the Royal Society goes back to this gentleman, Christopher Wren, who was the first person to inject fluids into the bloodstream of a live animal. So again, contrast this gentleman with Robert Boyle, who was very unwilling to perform vivisections and dissections. You know, it's not a leap to suggest that perhaps Robert Boyle would have also been unwilling to inject a live animal with fluids. Christopher Wren comes along. He's like, yeah, I'll take your oaths. I'll stick this dog with a needle and inject some fluids into it. But he doesn't tell us what those fluids are. So you can tell there's a very different kind of person in Christopher Wren than we have in Robert Boyle. And it says here, he was key to the correspondence network known as the Invisible College. So quite interesting that it's described as a correspondence network here. So his days at Oxford ended when he was appointed the Professor of Astronomy at Gresham College in London. And we've heard about that before. That's something we've got to look up, this Gresham College. Wren took up his new work with enthusiasm. He continued to meet the men with whom he had frequent discussions in Oxford. They attended his London lectures and in 1660 initiated formal weekly meetings. It was from these meetings that the Royal Society, England's premier scientific body, was to develop. He undoubtedly played a major role in the early life of what would become the Royal Society. His great breadth of expertise in so many different subjects helped in the exchange of ideas between the various societies. And I went through the rest of this article, and then it's all fine. It's kind of... One interesting thing is that, in comparison to Robert Boyle, who died in his 60s and started getting ill in his 40s and died in his 60s, this chap, Christopher Wren, he lived till he was 90. And he got married twice, and both times his wives died very soon after they were married to him. So I wonder if that's something to do with him making an oath. I don't know. The price you got to pay. I'm not sure. But nothing really jumped out to me apart from those things I just mentioned until we get all the way down here. There's examples of his architectural work. It is pretty amazing stuff. And as I mentioned, the St. Paul's Cathedral there. So it took 36 years between the start of the building and the declaration by Parliament of its completion. Interesting number for you numerologists out there, 36. If you add up every number between 1 and 36, what do you get? Then also, interesting, here in the spring of 1666, he made his first design for a dome from St. Peter's. Oh, there's all the numerology's popping off in this one, isn't it? Oh my God, here's more. Between the 5th and the 11th of September, he ascertained the precise area of devastation, worked out a plan for rebuilding the city, and submitted it to Charles II. You can tell I didn't read this bit closely on my first pass through it. So we've got 666, we've got 36, which is also 666 because every number between 1 and 36 added together equals 666. And then we've also got the 11th of September just to top it off nicely. How about that? St. Paul's Cathedral. Nothing shady and weird going on there whatsoever, honestly. Oh, how about that as well? You got a nice checkerboard floor at the bottom there. But we're going to find out why that is in a minute. And some of you might have noticed and been looking ahead on the left here as to where this is going. Freemasonry. So remember this chap taking oaths to become the president of the Royal Society, whereas Robert Boyle refused to take the oath. Devout Anglican, believer in God, wanted to translate the Bible into Irish so more people could read it. Christopher Wren comes along. He makes the oath. And he becomes a sort of, he gets adopted, it says here. He was adopted by the Freemasons, accepted as a sort of honorary member or patron rather than an operative. So if you know much about Freemasonry and the symbolism of Freemasonry, you would not be surprised to see here a black and white checkerboard floor going all the way through this hole. How about that? It's probably just a coincidence though. So it says the Lodge of Antiquity number 2, which is one of the 4 founding Masonic lodges of the Premier Grand Lodge of England in 1777, has claimed Christopher Wren to have been its master. It sounds like this is disputed a little bit, but this person, James Anderson, a Scottish writer and minister, has made claims in a widely circulated constitutions while many of Wren's friends were still alive. So this guy was making these claims about Christopher Wren being a Mason and being a master. But it says here that he made highly creative claims as to the history or legends of Freemasonry. Highly creative claims. I'd like to get a hold of this James Anderson's work, but I imagine that seeing as he was doing his thing back in the 1700s, that copies of those books will be very hard to find. And then it says here that there's, maybe it was just the workmen's lodges, the lodges of the people working on the buildings that Christopher Wren designed. Maybe it's those Masons, and that's actually the group that he was involved in, and not the speculative or gentlemen's lodges, which were highly fashionable just after Wren's death. So a bit of muddying the water, a bit of uncertainty, but then it tells us that there was some piece of work done in 2011, and this was the Prestonian lecture, and this Prestonian lecture concluded that on the evidence of 2 obituaries and Aubrey's memoirs with supporting material, that he, Christopher Wren, he did indeed attend the closed meeting in 1691, probably of the Lodge of Antiquity, but that there is nothing to suggest that he was ever a Grand Officer as claimed by Anderson. So there you go. And he was also on our £50 banknote, which was issued in 1981 and 1984, and they got discontinued, I think. One of his buildings is also on the UNESCO World Heritage List, and that is the Greenwich Hospital. So there you have it. There is a little bit about Christopher Wren and Robert Boyle, 2 of the founding members of the Invisible College, which was the precursor to the London Society, the Royal Society of London. I keep calling it the London Society. You know what I mean. You know, the thing. And that's Christopher Wren. And that is pretty much all I have for our little... one more thing. Oh, no more things. There you go. The other thing I was going to talk about, for some reason I closed a tab, was... What was it? They keep getting described as natural philosophers. Yeah. So I was going to talk a little bit about natural philosophy, just as a kind of precursor to modern science. In fact, I'll just get that up quickly. I didn't go too deeply into it. But natural philosophy is a philosophical study of physics, that is nature and the physical universe. It was dominant before the development of modern science. So this is just interesting to remember because at this point in time, philosophy and science were one and the same thing. They were used and they were tied together. They were employed as, they were inseparable. They were kind of used in tandem. And then at some point, the development of modern science schismed away from philosophy, and that is when metaphysics left science, and philosophy left science, and epistemology left, and science went its own way into this like materialist, rationalist, hyper focused on sort of left brain, logical, analytical way of thinking, only dealing with the 5 sense reality, the things we can measure and the things we can observe and see, and leaving that other stuff out, right? So just a key thing to remember, and a good bit of history. When when you hear me ranting about scientism, we've now got a nice bit of context as to, when it was exactly that science started to become what it is today, and had the philosophy flushed out of it, and the consideration of things like metaphysics flushed out of it as well. Because I think that is quite critical in the mentality of the kind of eugenic, psychopathic elite who do all this crazy stuff to us because, we're stupid, dumb animals, and we need to be domesticated, and we need to be corralled and injected and experimented on, and all these other things as well. So they'd have a much harder time justifying doing these kind of things to us if they taught widely things such as philosophy, metaphysics, the ethics, epistemology, and these sort of branches of philosophy which would allow people to use to defend more eloquently and with more force, things such as defend against things such as the rollout of an experimental injection to the half the world's population, right? Okay, so that's my preamble ramble. We have got a few comments in YouTube to review. Shout out to Heidi on the Rumble chat. She's going to watch it later, but thank you for stopping by to leave us a comment. Appreciate that very much. And we got a few comments on YouTube to review, so we'll just go through these and have a look. Okay, so Record Deepness says, Harry Elmer Barnes commented on the obstacles to World War II revisionism around the same time this work was published. Yeah, that's the concept. That's the kind of the era in history that I see revisionism often linked to. And of course, you are not allowed to question or do any revisionism when it comes to that time. We all know what happened. We all know who was to blame and exactly how many of each group of people were killed. Nothing going on there. Nothing occulted or hidden there, Mind hack. Good evening. Nice to see you. Rosicrucians, same as Freemasonry. Famous occultist Auguste Comte is partly responsible. Celine Lyon says, Hi Nick, I shouldn't be here as I need to go back and watch the first one. I will let you off if you want to stick around. No problem. I mean, it's not a narrative, so you don't need to get it in order. So you could chill, get tonight's chapters, go back and watch the other ones. It's not a kind of, it's not building on previous ideas. Celine Lyon says, germ theory is a great example of that. I think maybe you're talking about scientism there. Mindhack says, I tried to read that book. It kind of tried to debunk these ideas. I'm not sure which book we're talking about now. Dawkins is still kicking around. Yeah, Richard Dawkins. The Selfish Gene. Oh, is that you're talking about Selfish Gene maybe? Okay. SD says, very Masonic. Gwen says, Nick, the language in that illustration is mostly Latin. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That's why I couldn't read it. I wasn't trained in Latin before I was 8 years old for some reason. Mindhack says, a lot of these people had their toes in a lot of different fields. Yeah, I think that's the way people used to be educated. They would get coherent and cohesive understanding of a variety of interlocking and overlapping disciplines, right? The way we get educated now is, here's a bunch of geography facts, memorize them. Here's a bunch of history facts, memorize them. Here's a bunch of French vocabulary, memorize it. Regurgitate it in your exam. Here's a piece of paper with a letter on it. Go pay some taxes. But these guys, the kind of education they're getting was really holistic, really all-encompassing, proper tutoring with probably being taught along the lines of the trivium and the quadrivium, how to think, how to reason, how to use grammar, logic, and rhetoric in that order to build arguments. You could see they must have been trained that way because they're writing books and pamphlets and they're getting together and having discussions with other powerful, well-educated minds of the time. So they just had a totally different grade and standard of learning than we get. Bitcoin Mining says, was Boyle pressured to push opiates? I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Did he say something about that on his Wikipedia article? I might have missed it. Shamanarchist is saying the roulette wheel. Adam says, what's the link between Freemasonry and checkerboard floors? In a lot of, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who gets this right, but my understanding is Freemasonry is knowledge. It's like the knowledge contained within Freemasonry is communicated in symbols, and they have a lot of symbols that are that pop up again and again and again. One is the classic one is the compass and the square, and you can see this kind of compass and square logo that they use on a lot of their uniforms, and it has a G in the middle. That's one. That's a classic free. They have two pillars is another one they use, and a lot of their imagery and a lot of their symbolism, they have a checkerboard floor, and people say that it's supposed to represent duality, or the trapping of human beings in a black and white way of thinking. You know, when you meet someone and they're just black and white about everything, it's either good or it's bad, it's right or it's wrong. It's they're the people who tend to be they tend to fall into traps like the red blue team political game. I'm in the blue team and the red team are evil, or I'm in the red team and the blue team are idiots. Right? It's supposed to symbolize trapping people in that us and them fighting amongst themselves, arguing with each other type of consciousness and worldview. So you're always fighting the other group on your level instead of looking up to the higher levels and the people who are really running the show and the scams and keeping people under control, right? So it's kind of like trap people on a horizontal war so they don't do a vertical war and knock us off the top of the pyramid, which they could easily do if they got themselves organized and they all came to an agreed understanding of what's going on and how things really work, right? Hope that made sense. And happy to be corrected if somebody is more symbolically literate than I am. But you'll see it now if you watch television at all. It's in films. It's always in films. It's always in TV shows. It often happens when there's some allusion to mind control or mind reprogramming or split, psychological kind of thrillers have checkerboard floors in them quite a lot. So it's all over the place. Yeah, shamanakist says divide and conquer Hegelian dialectic. Yes, shamanakist. Oh, thank you for the pronunciation, listener. I needed that. Shamanakist. It's a great name. Mindhack says that's what made them so brilliant. Yeah, and I think you're referring there to the kind of the trivium and quadrivium education they got, where they got a holistic way to view things and how things overlap and interconnect and aren't. And we're just taught how to memorize trivia, basically. Think about all the game shows on television where people come up and they win loads of money just for answering totally unrelated trivial questions. Which sports star won the trophy in the year 1980, and which film contains the theme music written by Michael Jackson, whatever. Just all this trivial, unconnected nuggets of information that don't add up to anything. And then it's rewarded and it's praised and they shower these cash prizes on people who can do that. And then you get people going to like pub quizzes. And again, so it's like the celebration of being able to regurgitate unconnected facts rather than a celebration of people who can have a holistic understanding of things that connects and fits together and makes sense on a wider view and a bigger sort of, what am I trying to say? A deeper understanding rather than that surface level understanding of just factoids. Cool. Hope that was helpful. And I think it's about time to get into the book. So I'm going to have a sip. Got my metal straw on the go. I don't like these paper straws they're using everywhere now. I feel like they're probably even more toxic than the plastic ones because they just disintegrate in the drink, right? And who knows what bleaches and chemicals that cardboard has been treated with. And you can't even get to the bottom of your drink before it's just become all soggy, and that can't be good for you. So I've got a metal straw. I found it in my drawer, and I'm a big fan. Makes a really satisfying sound as well when you stir the drink that's got ice cubes in it. Makes a good sound. It makes me feel like I'm on holiday. Gives me a summery feeling, despite the fact that here in the UK it's overcast and cloudy, and the temperature outside is more like autumn. It's like still cold weather, even though we're in the middle of summer. I don't know what's going on. Well, I do know what's going on. Some sort of geoengineering weather manipulation, but okay. Let us get into I'm not sure what you mean by that, Adam, but hopefully someone else does. I know when I'm connecting between noses and straws is the kind of thing that people do who are very rich and very wealthy, and they like to stay up all weekend having parties, right? That's where my mind's going with that question. No, it's not that kind of straw, if that's what you're asking. Alrighty, let's get into the book. I thought that's what you were asking. Nope, it's just for my ice salty water. I've got really into ice water with a little dash of salt. and plain water now just tastes very like boring, and I just crave like a dash of salt in all my water. Is it just me, or is anybody else like icy, salty water? Maybe it's just me. Okay, so tonight's chapter, I think this is one that we've all been waiting for, which is Man, a Wild Animal. So we're going to be hearing about how we are no better than the beasts of the field, and therefore we need to be tamed and domesticated and dumbed down by our betters. All right, let's get into it. Chapter 7, Man, a Wild Animal. In the past 2 chapters, I have examined different aspects of the nature of man. In the first, he was regarded just like any other species of wild animal, while in the second, some of his social qualities were considered, which might not be regarded as those of a wild animal. Civilization might, loosely speaking, be counted as a sort of domestication, in that it imposes on man conditions not at all typical of wild life. It might then at least be argued that it is a false analogy to compare man to a wild animal, but that he should rather be compared to one which has been domesticated. And remember his analogy of sheep and goats, which was in the last chapter, where he said the sheep are very... Yeah, it's right here. It's literally the page before this bit. It's worth recapping. The majority of the population, something like 9/10, accept their creed implicitly. There is always a small minority who do not. Most people, call them sheep, follow the ideas of the leaders unquestioningly. But this minority, the goats, go by contraries and disbelieves anything just because those around them believe it. The goats are often not very pleasant people, but they are usually above the average of intelligence. So there you are. If you are questioning your leaders and you are not doing what everyone around you does, just because, then you're a goat and you're above average intelligence, according to Charles Galton Darwin. So I shall maintain that this analogy would be false, and that man is and will always continue to be essentially a wild and not a tame animal. Before coming to this main theme, it is important to notice that, if it were admissible to regard man as a domesticated animal, the whole time scale of history would have to be radically altered. Thus, though the geological evidence shows that it takes 1 million years to make a new wild species, we know that the various domesticated animals have been created in a very much shorter time. For example, the ancestors of the greyhound and the bulldog of 10,000 years ago would probably have been quite indistinguishable. If then, man's characteristics could be similarly remolded in so short a time, the whole future of history might be radically different. It would become impossible to forecast man's future after as short a period as 10,000 years, hardly longer than the span of known past history, instead of the 1 million years which holds if he is a wild animal. In the first place, it is necessary to be clear as to what is meant by a wild or a tame animal. We are apt sometimes to call an animal wild because it is dangerous to man, and to call it tame because it is harmless. But this is a slovenly way of speaking, and here I shall use the word tame simply as a synonym for domesticated, which I think is its true meaning. A tame animal, then, is one that does the will of a master, and the savage watchdog, trained to bite all intruders, is tamer than the friendly terrier which sometimes slips away to do its own private hunting. All tame animals owe their qualities to centuries of selective breeding, and it must always be remembered that the changes made in them owe nothing to the inheritance of acquired characters, but are due to the selection for breeding of those individual animals which show to the highest degree natural characteristics useful to their masters. So he's telling us he's talking about dogs, but he's not really, is he? Okay. A chief feature in domesticated animals has been the creation of a great variety of breeds, each specialized for some particular purpose, either practical or aesthetic. Each breed far excels its wild ancestry in the quality for which it has been bred, so that race horses run faster than wild horses, dairy cows give much more milk than any wild cattle, and the sheepdog has even been bred to do skillfully the exact opposite of what the ancestral wolf would have done. Now, human families often show special qualities in which they excel their fellows, and in some cases, these qualities seem to be hereditary. Witness the musicians of the Bach family. If man is really a tame animal, there is no reason why breeds of man should not be created, say breeds of mathematicians or of professional runners, who should possess gifts far beyond anything we now know, and far beyond anything that their fellows could compete against. Certainly, at the present time, mankind is very far from this, but that would not exclude the possibility in the not-so-very-distant future, if man really were a tame animal. I shall consider this question of special breeds later in the chapter in more detail. All the evidence seems to show that they will not arise, but to see this clearly, it is best to return to the prime feature of tameness, obedience to a master. So actually what he's saying is we are not tame and domesticated. We do not respond to a master. And I have a feeling that he's probably going to go on to lament this fact and say it's a damn shame, because if only human beings were tame and obedient to a master, then we could make a much better future for ourselves over the next million years. But that's just my prediction for the chapter. It is obvious that we in this country, with our passion for freedom, value wildness very highly. Whereas in some lands where the population are content to live under a much more strictly controlled rule of discipline, tameness may be more nearly acceptable. This question of taste is irrelevant, however, for it might be that a tame race could achieve so much higher a degree of efficiency that it could master the wild ones, and so reduce them also to a state of tameness. I am going to maintain that this cannot happen, in that man is untamable. The reason involves a feature not often present in scientific arguments, and I will venture to introduce it by means of a fable. Yay, it's story time. Story time with Uncle Galton Darwin. There was a man who was endowed with very great intelligence, very great wealth, deep scientific knowledge, and a benevolent wish to improve the lot of mankind. He also knew himself to have the gift of longevity, so that he had the prospect not only of starting on his beneficent plans, but of seeing them through to their final accomplishment. Now it chanced that about this time there came up for sale a large uninhabited island, enjoying a climate in every way fitting it for human habitation. He purchased the island, and persuaded a large number of his friends and admirers to come with him and to settle there and live under his direction. The director first made a thorough study of his people's natural gifts and capacities, and then he set each man and woman to the work for which they were specially fitted. Artisans were chosen who had both skill in craftsmanship and a liking for their trade, domestic servants who had a passion for cleanliness, and cooks who were really interested in the taste of the food they produced. He chose for schoolmasters those who could best inspire their pupils. His professors and research workers were selected because they showed the highest flights of scientific imagination. His lawyers possessed the greatest subtlety in argument. His civil servants and industrialists were those who were gifted with the highest qualities of administrative ability. Nor did he neglect the other sides of his people's interests, for he selected those who were gifted at painting and music and pottery, and encouraged them to practice their arts. He also had actors and actresses of great charm and beauty, and athletes who could run very fast, jump very high, or guide a ball with remarkable accuracy. Having laid the foundation of his plan in this manner, he persuaded them all through his dominating personality, nor, be it said, was compulsion entirely absent, to mate together in such a manner that the various special gifts of each group were conserved and enhanced. That was kind of a strange little addition there, wasn't it? No, be it said, was compulsion entirely absent. I guess that just means that they wanted to. Those of the settlers who proved unsatisfactory in mind or body were gradually eliminated, not by exile or punishment, but merely by forbidding them to enter into fertile unions. All right, so this is eugenics, in other words. At the end of 10,000 years, he had achieved results in humanity even more remarkable than those that have been already achieved in this span of time in our domestic animals. His actresses were of surpassing beauty, and his athletes, whose limbs had attained very highly specialized proportions, were so persistently victorious that international contests became impossible. All the really ingenious machines in the world were contrived by his engineers, and in their construction his artisans were preeminent. His diplomatists could always get their way with the diplomatists of other countries. His research workers made remarkable progress in the development of scientific knowledge, though it was perhaps not often they who started any wholly new subject. The director had produced this surpassing improvement in the quality of his subjects in the course of 10,000 years. When it was revealed to him that his life was nearing its end, and now he saw that his work had been in vain, because he had made no provision for a successor to himself. He had moulded his subjects so that they fulfilled their tasks superlatively, because he could look at those tasks objectively. But his own task he could only know subjectively, and the prescriptions he had used for the others were without avail. He had tamed men into being domestic animals, but he could not tame anyone into being a director, because a director must be a wild and not a tame animal. So, moral of the story? What do you think? Though this has only been presented as a fable, the experience with domesticated animals does show that the most astonishing improvements could be made in the various human faculties. If a similar course of continuous selection could be applied to man over as long a period of time. The trouble is that for man, this is not possible, because he has got to apply the selection to himself, and that means that it is not merely a different problem, but a wholly different kind of problem. There is a fundamental difference between the subjective and the objective. Scientific progress has always succeeded only by regarding its themes of study objectively. Even in the field of psychology, progress has mainly come by the study of the minds of others, that is to say, objectively, instead of by following the old barren course of introspection. The old barren course of introspection. Yeah, because there's nothing to be gained by going inside and having a good, long, hard look at yourself and your own subconscious drivers and your own childhood memories and traumas and experiences. And nothing. That's barren. Don't bother doing that. Just analyze other people. The most severe critic of his own conduct can never judge his actions as if they were someone else's. And the selective breeding of other types of people would be no guide at all in the breeding of his own kind. If the director had foreseen his death, he would have tried to produce a successor to himself. Since his profound belief in heredity had been so fully confirmed by the remarkable changes he had made in his subjects, he would naturally expect that it would be one of his own sons that would be best fitted to succeed him. But his difficulty would be just the same if he were trying to find a successor elsewhere. The matter is on quite a different footing from all his other decisions. For the others, he could say, "I have improved all our breeds by seeing which son improved on the qualities of his father. That is why I select you." For his own successor, the utmost he could say would be, "I am selecting you in the hope that you may be a better director than I have been, but I have no idea how you will set about it, since, if I had known what I was failing in, I should have set it right myself. The targets in the two statements are quite different, for in one, he knows what he is aiming at, in the other, he does not. In one case, the target is to make the man better, in the other, to hope to make him as good. One is the systematic breeding of tame animals, the other the unsystematic method of nature in the breeding of wild animals. This point is so important that before following it to its conclusion, I will give another example, which has the advantage of not being fabulous. In their studies of how to improve the human race, the eugenists, yeah, I always thought it was eugenicists, but yeah, I guess it's eugenists, have very naturally considered both ends of their problem, the increase in the good qualities of humanity and the elimination of the bad qualities. Their chief effort has gone, quite rightly at first, into the easy part of the problem, and they have spent most of their energy in pointing out the disastrous tendencies of the present policy of directly encouraging the breeding of the feeble-minded. This is undoubtedly useful work, but it is comparatively easy, since these feeble-minded can be regarded objectively by their superiors, and so might become amenable to the same sort of control as is applicable to domestic animals. This restraint of the breeding of the feeble-minded is important, and it must never be neglected, but it cannot be regarded as a really effective way of improving the human race. If by analogy one wished to improve the breed of racehorses, one might accomplish a little by always slaughtering the horse that finished last in every race, but it would be a much slower process than the actual one of sending the winner to the stud farm. Well, how about that? I think he's starting to show his true colours. Conscious of this criticism, eugenists have often attempted to define what are the good characteristics which should be positively encouraged, instead of only the negative ones that must be discouraged. But the results are disappointing. Lists of meritorious qualities such as good health, good physique, high intelligence, good family history are compiled, and those possessing them are told that they should breed. But the statements lead nowhere in practice, for no one can be expected to assess his own merits and demerits in a balanced way. How, for example, is a man to weigh his own good health or good ability against a heredity made dubious, say, by an uncle who was insane? Or again, how is he to strike a balance between considerable artistic gifts, as he thinks, together with a good family record, but quite bad health? It's clearly beyond anyone to decide these things for himself, and even then the matter is only half settled, since similar judgments are needed for both partners to the marriage. However helpful the literature may be which can be consulted, it is evident that subjective judgments on such matters are too difficult. With the best will in the world, they would very often be made wrongly, because, however sincerely he tries, no man can be a good judge in his own case. The only manageable way of overcoming these difficulties would be to set up a class of consultants who would prescribe what marriages were eugenically admissible and how large the consequent families should be. But this does not solve the difficulty, it only pushes it back a stage, for it leaves unanswered the question who are to be the consultants, and what principles are to guide them in settling the values of the different qualities of mankind. It comes back to just the difficulty I described in my fable, that a tame animal must have a master, and that therefore, though it might conceivably be possible to tame the majority of mankind, this could only be done by leaving untamed a minority of the population. Moreover, this minority would have to be the group possessing the most superior qualities of all. That's a really good point he's making, though. The kind of it's a bit of a catch-22 as he's describing it here, isn't it? We need the best people to be the directors, but then that means that the best people aren't procreating and having lots of babies, because they're directing the rest of us who are not the best people, and therefore you're going to end up with you can see where it goes, right? That's probably a page worth tabbing. Bear with me a sec. I'll pop a tab in, and we'll just say hello to Double O Governor. I don't think I've seen you in a chat before. Welcome. It's very nice to have you here. It says they trusted their own cleverness. They are absolutely they're very much into the superiority of their own intelligence and their cleverness. That's right. And Adam says, two-race system, the leaders and the led. Yeah, and this, remember we talked about H.G. Wells, the time machine, I think in part 1, about the, what is it, the Eli and the Morlocks. Did I get that right this time? I couldn't remember the name of them in that first video. But yeah, this is the same thing that he's describing here, isn't it? Frank Lennon, crikey, in your face eugenics, a world full of prima donnas. Control, control, control. It's always about control. Yeah, never live and let live. No, of course not. We can't have those undesirables having lots of babies and children and living a happy life with big families. Okay. I feel like that's a bit too dark. Can you guys see that all right? Hope it's not straining your eyes. Try and get a bit more light on the page for you. The book cam's just not picking it up or boosting the brightness for some reason. Is that any better? No, not really. Sorry for the interlude. Just trying to get the lighting levels right. Okay. These examples suggest the impossibility of taming mankind as a whole, but before accepting the principle fully, it is proper to examine a case where the exact contrary has happened. This is in the insect civilizations of the ants or termites. Being compared to ants again. I think he did that in the intro, if I remember rightly. I hate it. I hate being compared to bees and hives. I've said on the stream before, my employer has a personnel system in which we all have to download our CVs and put a profile in there, and it's called the Hive. And I really resent the name of it, because it's like, oh, you're a worker bee, you're a drone, you're expendable, and you're serving, the queen at the center of the hive, the one important aspect, which, the queen is probably the board of trustees or the partners or whatever. So yeah, but ants in this case, equally insulting and kind of the same as bees, isn't it really? In applying the same term, civilization, to both ants and men, it is hardly necessary to say that I am drawing an analogy between things which are really of very different quality. Okay, at least he acknowledges that. All species of ants live in cities. Yeah, all species of ants live in cities, and some species have developed agriculture, others animal husbandry. But all these practices are purely instinctive and individual to each species. On the other hand, human civilization is an acquired character based on education, and so is not inherent in man's nature. Nevertheless, it may be worthwhile to follow out the analogy a little further. That's interesting, isn't it? That civilization is not inherent in man's nature. I'm not sure what I think about that. What do you think? Is civilization in our nature or not? Has it been given to us? Has it been, have we been handed this by superior beings or superior thinkers or men? Was it given to us from the spirit realm, perhaps? Maybe Quetzalcoatl arrived and handed us civilization? I don't know. Is it inherent or not? Admitting the different senses of the words, it may be said that all species of ants have made the third revolution, the invention of cities, that some have made the second, agriculture, none the first or fourth, fire and science. But they have all added another revolution of their own, the complete control of the problem of sex. The ant's nest has no rulers at all, for the queen is hardly more than an egg-laying mechanism, and they seem to get on perfectly well without civil servants or lawyers or captains of industry. Well, the world would probably run just fine with much fewer civil servants in it and lawyers. Industry, you know, that might be handy to keep the industry going though. Why cannot man set up a community like an ant's nest? This would be the ideal of the anarchist, and hitherto it has held no promise at all of success. But with the help of recent and probable future biological discoveries, some sort of imitation by man of the ant's nest cannot be quite excluded from consideration. Thus, the control of the numbers of the two sexes may become possible. And with the knowledge of the various sexual hormones, it might also become possible to free the majority of mankind from the urgency of sexual impulse so that they could live contented, celibate lives instead of the unsatisfied, celibate lives that are the compulsory lot of such a large fraction of the present population of the world. So he's talking about incels, involuntary celibates, who you might have heard of before. These are the people who nobody wants to have sex with. So they are involuntarily celibate. But quite incredible stuff. I'm just trying to find a way to highlight that section, even though it's already all been underlined by the previous owner. That whole bit there. So we want to make people content in their celibacy, which reminds me quite a lot of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World situation, where people are just drugged, you know, into enjoying their slavery and servitude and crap situation in life, isn't it? So very similar type of idea. If these discoveries should be made, and this is really by no means impossible, man would be able to carry out the sex revolution, which is the typical characteristic of the insect civilizations. Oh, yippee. We get to be like the insects. The detail would, of course, have to be quite different. For instead of one queen, there would have to be large numbers of fertile women to renew the population, whereas there might be one king, literally the father of his country. What? So this is what's that? The book, but the Handmaid's Tale. This is Handmaid's Tale, isn't it? Handmaid's Tale. So we've got large numbers of fertile women and one king. I bet he's I bet he's like, I'll be the king. I'm going to put in here, Handmaid's Tale. And yeah, who just said that in the chat? Sharmanicist, hidden in plain sight in art, movies, and literature. Yeah, so that's a good example. Handmaid's Tale, TV series and book, novel, I think. It's maybe even series of novels. That's planting that idea of that kind of society in your mind so that you will be more, you'll be less resistant to it when it occurs in real life. That's how predictive programming works and how ideas get planted in your subconscious so that when they occur, you are more accepting and less likely to push back and call it out and say no and fight against it because you've already been like primed to witness and accept that happening through the media and the storylines and the characters that you, you associate with them. You identify with these characters who go through this, and therefore you become like part of the story and you can see yourself in it. So when it happens and is rolled out around you, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I'm just the guy in the film, or I'm the girl in the film, and this is a totally okay, fine thing to be living through. It's a bit weird, isn't it? Oh, crazy. Instead of like going, no, I won't accept this, and fighting back and organizing yourselves and getting and pushing back in a meaningful way against it, you know, through the formation of intentional communities, for example. But yeah, one king and large numbers of fertile women. What could go wrong? Also, literally the father of his country. Also, it is probable that on account of their greater physical strength, it would be the men who would be the workers. Well, that's not very inclusive, is it? I don't think we can exclude the women from doing the work. It's a bit sexist. Such an organization is certainly repellently unattractive to most of us, perhaps excepting some of the autocrats of the present world. Oh, so perhaps these are some of the people who he talked to and got the ideas from, but he doesn't want to name. But interestingly, he admits that there are autocrats in the 1950s who would find this type of thing desirable. Autocrats, there you go. So it sounds like he knows probably personally some autocrats who are up for a bit of Handmaid's Tale. But it is not this that excludes the possibility. There is no danger whatever it's happening. Oh, that's a relief. Because of the inherent difference between vertebrate and insect. For the vertebrate is so very much more flexible than the insect in its behavior. Most insects simply die if placed on an unfamiliar food plant, whereas the vertebrate will always try experiments if its normal diet fails. An insect can be used to prey on and destroy another one that has become a pest, and, when it has done so, the predator will die of starvation. In the same role, a vertebrate predator would not die, but would start to destroy some other, perhaps beneficent species. Now of all vertebrates, man is preeminent in his willing to try experiments, so that it is inconceivable that he should settle down into the inflexible, unquestioning course of life that is typical of an insect. It would call for a quite radical change in his whole nature. It would not be a mere change into a new species of Homo that would be needed, nor even a change into a new genus or family or order of the mammals. It would have to be a fundamental change into a new phylum of the animal kingdom, and that would not take a mere million years, but many hundreds of millions of years. There is no prospect of man's nature imitating an insect's, but it is much more nearly imaginable than his development should go, like that of the dogs, into a set of breeds, each specialized for a particular purpose. So that's quite key as well. We all of us know of whole human families which possess gifts specialized in some particular direction. And if the specialization were narrowed and the gifts improved till all competitors were surpassed, such a family would have turned itself into a breed. But all past history contradicts this tendency, for it suggests that wherever there have been such groups, they have not increased further in their specialized skills, but that after a very few generations, they have tended to merge back into the general population. I will give you some examples, though my knowledge of history is hardly deep enough to cite them with any confidence. A first example may be drawn from the sanctity of royal blood, which has been a prevalent idea in many countries, and which would give opportunity for the inbreeding that is essential for the production of a specialized breed. The most extreme case is that of the dynasty of the Ptolemies in Egypt, whose blood was counted as so sacred that the reigning house had to be perpetuated by brother and sister marriages. Biologists no longer now regard close inbreeding as necessarily deleterious. Oh, really? I didn't know about that. Biologists no longer now regard close inbreeding as necessarily deleterious. But still, the possibility of its evil effects might throw doubt on any positive conclusions we could draw from the Ptolemies. But the only conclusions that can be drawn are entirely negative. The record of the dynasty is not very impressive. It is neither much better nor much worse than that of the other dynasties that had not been inbred, and in the end it collapsed, as did the other dynasties, under the irresistible might of the Romans. Neither in this extreme case, nor in other more modern ones, is there any sign of a tendency for a breed to arise that is specialized for kingship. Okay, well, that's quite an admission as well. Not what I was expecting. He's saying there's no sign of a tendency for a breed to arise that's specialized for kingship, all right? It may be contended that the number of individuals in reigning houses is too small to give rise to a breed, and my next example concerns a much larger population. It is the military caste of German nobles in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Whatever the extra-nuptial habits of this caste, its marriages were most strictly regulated, so that it might have provided the starting point for a specialized breed. It is undoubted that these noble families provided some very good generals. This was inevitable, since in their own country they had the monopoly of the officer ranks. But they were not conspicuously better than other generals who did not belong to the caste. In making the comparison, it might be argued that Louis XIV generals should be excluded, as themselves belonging to a similar caste. But the German military nobles were also far excelled by others, such as Marlborough, who, though of gentle birth, certainly was not drawn from the military caste. Furthermore, if this caste had shown promise of turning into a breed, it should have produced better generals at the end of 3 centuries than at the beginning. Whereas, if anything, they had degenerated. Excluding Napoleon from comparison, as an exception to all rules, they showed no marked superiority over his marshals, who came from all classes of society. In 300 years, this caste certainly showed no signs of turning into a specialized breed. A more striking example is the caste of the Brahmins in India. Because its purity has been preserved over many centuries by the religious sanctions of their creed, they have the advantage of being much more numerous than the castes I have cited hitherto. And they have very certainly played a conspicuous part in the history of India, but they show none of the tendency to an increase in specialization that should characterize the creation of a breed. Since there were never a military caste, it is not surprising that many of the reigning houses of India are not Brahmins, and the priestly function of the Brahmin would more naturally destine him to play the part of philosopher or intellectual. Now it is true that in the modern Indian universities, a considerable fraction, perhaps a majority, of the distinguished professors belong to this caste, but still there are quite a number of others as distinguished who do not. It seems at least doubtful whether in this there is any real difference between India and Europe, for in Europe also a very considerable fraction of the intellectual life is contributed by what might be called the hereditary middle classes. That is, by families which have continued through succeeding generations to show a general intellectual ability, though they are in no sense an exclusive caste. Once again, in these exceptionally favorable circumstances, I think I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. There is no sign of the Brahmins turning from a caste into a breed. This is the place to refer to the case of the Jews, because, though very superficially it might be thought similar, it is really quite different. It is true that for centuries they practiced the close inbreeding that would be needed for the creation of a specialized breed. But the point is that they have shown no signs of becoming specialized, for there have been Jews who have excelled in every one of the arts and sciences of civilized life. One of their distinguishing features has perhaps been that they were earlier adapted than the more recently civilized Western Europeans to the crowded life of cities. But this is not so much a specialization as an adaptation in which they have anticipated the others. In the course of the centuries, their races had one great advantage, though they would certainly very willingly have forgone it. This is their long history of almost continuous persecution, and it is tempting to believe that this has been an important factor in giving them their high qualities. In order merely to keep alive, a Jew had to show intelligence more frequently than did the surrounding peoples, and this intelligence was gradually incorporated in his heredity. But in all this, there is no sign of specialization. At most, it is a more complete adaptation to the crowded life of cities that has been hitherto shown by the rest. Interesting bit. I hadn't thought about that adaptation to cities before, but certainly that's not everyone's suited to living in cities. I'm just going to blow my nose. Excuse me a second. Not everyone's suited to living in cities, and interesting that the Jews in Charles Galton Darwin's view that's the advantage of theirs. And of course, the benefits of being continuously persecuted for no reason by everyone on the face of the earth. That will definitely toughen you up. All of these examples confirm that there are specialized abilities in some of humanity and that they are often hereditary, but they hold out no expectation that the specializations will spontaneously become narrower or that they will rise to higher levels, which is what they would have to do if man were destined automatically to branch out into breeds as distinct as those of the domestic animals. There may be those who will regret that man will not attain these pinnacles of specialization, but the failure is inevitable. In order to create such specialist breeds, there would have to be a master breed at the summit, and this would be a totally different kind of thing from all the other breeds, because it would have to create itself. Interesting. So, it's kind of sad that human beings are not going to become specialized and different like dogs. But in order for that to happen, you would need the master breed at the top. And they will have to create themselves. He's not saying that'll happen, though. That's not part of his prediction. He's just saying that's what would have to happen for human beings to develop and specialize, right? At every turn, the argument leads back to this question of the master breed. Nothing can be done in the way of changing man from a wild into a tame animal without first creating such a breed. But most people are entirely inconsistent in their ideas of what they want created. On the one hand, they feel that all the world's problems would be solved if only there were a wise and good man who would tell everybody what to do. But on the other hand, they bitterly resent being themselves told what to do. As to which of these motives would prevail, it seems at least probable that it would be the resentment, so that if the breed should arise in any manner, it would be extirpated before it could ever become well established. It is, however, imaginable that there might be a part of the world in which the breed was accepted, and that this part should gain a superiority over the rest of the world, because it could develop various suitable breeds of specialists under the control and direction of the master breed, and, by the exercise of the skills of these specialists, it might overcome the other nations. So it is appropriate to look a little further into the matter. Okay, we got to tab this page. If you had to put money on which nation or group of people in the world Charles Galton Darwin thinks would make good livestock for the master breed, put your answers in the chat. If anybody wants to. Okay, what did we get to there? Just here, wasn't it? All right, imagine that through new discoveries in biology, say by suitably controlled doses of X-rays, he loves X-raying people, it becomes possible to modify the genes in any desired direction so that heritable changes can be produced in the qualities of some members of the human race. I may say I do not believe this is ever likely to be practicable, but that does not matter as far as concerns the present argument. The first success might be in some physical attribute, for example, by making a breed with longer and stronger legs so that it could jump a good deal higher than anyone can at present. But passing to more important matters, there might be created a breed which could think more abstractly, say a breed of mathematicians, or one that could think more judiciously, say a breed of higher civil servants. These would be of great value, but they would not be the master breed, and the question arises of a more precise prescription for what the qualities of the master breed are to be. It is usually best to build on what one already has, rather than to start from nothing. So the natural procedure would be to begin with existing rulers, since these have already established themselves as acceptable to at least a good many of their fellow creatures. One would collect together, say, 100 of the most important present rulers. Among them, of course, should be included a good many who exert secret influence without holding any overt office. What? Okay. But, so you see, I thought, sounds a bit conspiratorial, doesn't it? Among them, of course, should be included a good many who exert secret influence without holding any overt office. That's, what's he trying to say? And tell them to get on with the business of settling what the master breed should be. It is impossible to believe that any such body of men would ever reach agreement on any subject whatever, so this plan fails. Okay. I'm glad all these plans are failing. In the search for the qualities of the master breed, the next idea might be to appeal to the wisdom of our forefathers. Plato in his Republic devotes much attention to this very subject. Why not then find a Plato, give him his group of recruits, and let him educate them for 30 years according to his prescription, though perhaps fortifying it by the findings of modern educational theory? The result should be the master breed. But this will not do either, for Plato was not educating the master breed, he was educating the civil servant breed. It is not about these that there is any difficulty. It is the finding of someone to fill the role of Plato himself. It all comes back to the point that we do not know in the remotest degree what we want. For I do not count as an answer the one that would usually be proposed, which would be that the type required should be good and wise, while at the same time showing a special favour for the particular enthusiasms of the proposer. The reason for the impossibility of making a prescription for the master breed is that it is not a breed at all. To call it so is to change the sense of the word. Breeds are specialized for particular purposes, but the essence of masters is that they must not be specialized. They have to be able to deal with totally unforeseen conditions, and this is a quality of wild, not of tame life. No prescription for the master breed is possible. In these considerations, I've been assuming the license of supposing that we might be able really to change human nature in a heritable manner, and this is far beyond all probability. Returning now to more practical considerations, there seems no likelihood whatever of a master breed arising. All through history, the most formidable difficulty of every ruler has been the selection of his successor, and the best intentions have been nearly always disappointed. Indeed, it is notably surprising how very seldom the choice has been well made. The immediate cause of these failures has been the difficulty of the subjective judgments on the basis of which the choice must be made. But fundamentally, they have arisen from a cause in the deep nature of mankind. Of all animals, man is the most ready to try experiments, and there are always candidates, far too many candidates, who regard themselves as fit members for the master breed. This quality is a characteristic of a wild animal, and it will always prevent man from domesticating himself. He will always prevent the creation of the master breed, through which alone the rest of man could be domesticated. The evolution of the human race will not be accomplished in 10,000 years of tame animals, but in the million years of wild animals, because man is and will always continue to be a wild animal. And that is the end of chapter 7. And the next chapter, which we will get on with in a moment, is limitations of population. So, I have to say, my predictions were completely wrong there. I really thought he was going to settle on master breed and who they could be and come up with some answers, but no. Oh, we've got ESP over on Odyssey. Good evening. I'm going to also write good evening in the chat to you. And we've got a few comments in the YouTube chat also. Let's see. You can't just, Record Deepness says, you can't just make the livestock, you have to make the farmer first. Yeah, that's a good way of summarizing that chapter there. Frank Lennon suggests transhumanism as a good breed. Yeah, that could be the way they go about it, right? In fact, that actually puts transhumanism in a new kind of light. You know, if this group come along and they augment themselves with some whatever form that augmentation takes, while at the same time they're practicing dysgenics on the rest of us, dumbing us down, filling our bodies with microplastics and heavy metals and whatever they're spraying on us every day. It's like they're going for both at once, isn't it? And I wonder if Charles Galton Darwin, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see the rest of the book. I'm surprised he bailed out on that concept of a master breed there, but what he's kind of saying is that, well, he said a master breed cannot arise because they have to be wild, and that will never happen. But so therefore we're all wild, so we're all part of the master breed. I don't know. I'm not quite following his use of wild and tame. I get it. I get what he's saying. I don't know. I feel like there is a small subsection of society who are wild, or at least who view themselves as the farmers to the livestock of the rest of us, right? I feel like, when describing what this place is, this planet or this realm or whatever you want to call it, there's a few words come to mind. Prison is one and farm is the other. It's a prison or a farm. It's one of those two. It's the best word. If you had to sum it up in a word. And when I say that, I mean the way it's run, the type of the systems and the bureaucracies and the cultures we're given, it's run as though, it's either a farm or a prison. I'm not saying it was designed and created with that intention. I'm saying it's run that way. So yeah, interesting chapter. It's like, it was funny how he threw those examples out, the example of the insects and the farming and the farmers and the master breed, and then sort of said, oh, but it's never going to happen. and he, described the Jews in there as well for good measure, but it's never going to happen. So maybe he couldn't say any more than he did. He kind of said it without saying it by negating it, right? Maybe. I'm not sure. What do you think? But yeah, I agree with you, Frank. Transhumanism is a way to enhance, the people who sign up for it and get involved and want it, and the people who don't kind of get left behind. Bitcoin mining says people that have endured a harsher environment. And the sad thing is, the association of melanin production due to the harshness of environment is an association of kid play, visual skin color. Thank you for that. Secret societies, says the shamanicist, probably in reference to the master breed. Bitcoin mining says innovation comes from problems. If so, not needing to change your environment to survive means less innovation. The Eskimos aren't racist, but I defend people wanting to live as they want to live. So, that's a good point. People who've got it all sussed, like tribes and who live at one with nature and in perfect balance with nature, they don't innovate because they don't need to, because they've got it all figured out, right? They got their food sources, go pick some food, go kill some animals, and then sit around the fire singing songs and roasting meat and telling stories and enjoying yourselves with the people you love, the people in your tribe. I'm probably romanticizing it. It's probably quite terrifying to live in a jungle. You might get hunted by giant cats or something. Record Deepness says, so all that to conclude, the project of master breeds is impossible. I'm somehow relieved. Me too. And Gary Garner's here. Good evening. Nice to be able to catch a live for once. Enjoy your readings. I'm very glad to hear that. And it's very good to have you here. Great to see you in the chat. I appreciate you taking the time to write a message, Gary. Yeah, I'm kind of relieved after that chapter and surprised. But, like I just said, I question why he wrote it and put it in. Because there's got to be a reason. Why would you write all that to say, well, it's not going to happen and it can't possibly happen? Very curious things in that chapter. And I don't think all is as it seems. I don't think we can exactly trust and buy into the overt, explicit things he's writing. I think we've got to try and read between the lines and maybe spin some theories as to why he would include that chapter. But we'll see what he comes up with next. I'll have a sip and then we'll crack on. Right. Limitation of population. Chapter 8. In the past chapters, I have discussed some of the basic qualities of man, which show that in general he behaves and will continue to behave like a wild animal. Consequently, he will obey the law of nature by multiplying up to the limit of subsistence, and there will therefore normally be a marginal group of humanity living and dying at the starvation level. This is the old threat of Malthus, and there are many people at the present time who are very conscious of it. But whereas Malthus could only express the hope that man would learn voluntarily to restrain himself from multiplying up to the limit, it has been found since then that in some countries, and those among the most prosperous, the populations are spontaneously becoming stationary or even decreasing. Yeah, this reminds me of, I think Jordan Peterson talked about this at some point, and he was pointing out that as wealth goes up in a society, the number of children born goes down, and then couples tend to just have 2 per family on average. The reason for families having lots of children is because, well, there's a lot of different reasons that go into it, but one reason is when you don't have any kind of wealth, then your children are your wealth, and your children are going to look after you in later life, or they're going to be able to help you work to gather more food so you can survive, right? So they're not just children, they're also workers, they're extra hands. They're not just an extra mouth to feed, they're also an extra pair of hands to do work and gather that food. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but I remember him saying that typically as countries become more prosperous, the birth rate goes down. So his solution was to focus on increasing wealth and prosperity, which I thought was quite a good argument. But he's kind of saying the same thing here. Malthus was wrong, and what actually happens is that populations spontaneously become stationary or even decreasing. Now, let's see if he goes on to mention, the wealth of the countries in which this is happening. He has already mentioned previously in the book twice, I think, that the population of white people is decreasing, and at this time, 1950s, probably fair to say that white people predominantly inhabited, wealthy nations and prosperous nations. So you should be able to see that pattern, I think. Let's see if he mentions it. If then, it is argued, some countries have created conditions which automatically solve the problem of overpopulation, why should not these same conditions produce the same results in all countries? And then we could all be comfortable together. I am going to maintain that, though such limitations of populations may recur locally from time to time, the condition is essentially an unstable one and contains the seeds of its own destruction. Any country which limits its population becomes thereby less numerous than one which refuses to do so. And so the first will be sooner or later crowded out of existence by the second. And again, just remember that, all you white people who aren't having children. Any country which limits its population becomes less numerous than the one which refuses to do so, and so the first will be sooner or later crowded out of existence by the second, okay? And again, the stationary population is avoiding the full blast of natural competition, and, following a universal biological law, it will gradually degenerate. It is impossible to believe that a degenerating small population can survive in the long run in a strongly competitive world, or that it can have the force to compel the rest of the world to degenerate with it. The present spontaneous decline in fertility affects many of the most prosperous countries, and it is a phenomenon that was hardly foreseen even 50 years ago. Boom, called it. Obviously, Jordan Peterson has been reading Charles Galton Darwin. Probably part of the download he received when he went to stay in Russia. Bitcoin Mining says, I think it's more basic. We all want to pass our genes on. The percentage of your young dying makes you need to have more children to guarantee your genes carry on. Yeah, that follows. It makes sense. Record deepness. Lothrop Stoddard made the same argument in The Rising Tide of Colour. I've never heard of that person or that book, but I will make a note to follow up. What a name. Lothrop Stoddard. Great name. Thank you for that. All right. Let's carry on. Man has not any very strong procreative instincts. In the uncivilized state, that did not matter, since his very strong sexual instincts sufficed to maintain the race. But our present economy is so organized that there are great handicaps against large families, and many compensations for those who either intentionally or unintentionally sterile. For those who are either intentionally or unintentionally sterile. In past periods of high prosperity, there was often a similar state of affairs, but the development of easy methods of birth control is a new factor of great importance, which seems to have upset the balance by making it so very easy to be childless or to have such a small family that the population is not maintained. I believe it is disputed how important the various contributory causes may be, but it is indisputable that a considerable fraction of the population find it both easy and convenient to contribute less than their share to the next generation. And this fraction is especially the one enjoying the highest prosperity. So more prosperity to you if you don't have children, is what he's saying. It's all about you, isn't it? It's all about you and your money. It is convenient to have a short phrase to describe this state of affairs in which prosperity produces childlessness. And I shall characterize it by saying that the prospect of owning a motor car is a sufficient bribe to sterilize most people. Wow, that's quite a claim. Car, children. Yeah, let's have a car. Brum, brum. I do not apologize for calling it sterility, for though the term is often used to imply a physical incapacity that is held in contempt, it is, biologically speaking, immaterial whether the incapacity is forced or voluntary. In my phrase, the motor car is of course only metaphorical, as a symbol of as the sort of level of prosperity that tends to be associated with small families or childlessness. And it is being found that as prosperity spreads downwards in the social scale, so the families tend to become smaller there too. It would be difficult to say which is cause and which effect, for children are an economic disadvantage, so that their presence lowers their parents' prospects. And on the other hand, the ease and comfort of existing prosperity discourages the creation of children. To see the consequences of this state of affairs, I shall look more closely at the way things have been going in this country during the past century. In studying the trend of our population, if the study is to be any use at all, it is necessary to adopt some standard of values for the different constituents of the community. There is at present current in some quarters an equalitarian trend of opinion, which is quite dangerously unsound. It is the type that condemns all eugenic views on principle. Okay, let's just go back and read that again. There is at present current in some quarters an equalitarian trend of opinion which is quite dangerously unsound. It is the type that condemns all eugenic views on principle, presumably because they conflict with a dead level of equality. Okay, so what he's saying is, if you condemn eugenics, then your opinion is quite dangerously unsound. I think that's going to be one to tab as well. That sounds like the kind of lefty rhetoric you might find on a university campus in the modern day, right? I think going on about reproductive rights and sexual health. They always call it health. It's health. And how selfish it is and bad for the planet if you want to have children. I don't know though. I don't know if that quite tracks. I don't think it. I think maybe it doesn't. It tries to prejudice the case in advance by stating that the eugenist rates the rich higher than the poor, without any examination whatever of the very different things that he really does claim. It may therefore be well for me to elaborate the point. Oh, good. So he's going to give us a proper elucidation of what the eugenist does claim. In discussions on social policy, in which these criticisms are expressed, lip service is paid to the doctrine that all men are of equal merit, but it is to be noticed that such statements are usually reserved for general argument, and that those who make them pay the most jealous attention to the comparative merits of individuals when it is a question of making an appointment to any important post. It is the man who is believed to be the ablest who is promoted, and this brings to him some increase in reward, which may be a higher salary or perhaps some other mark of civic recognition. So he said this in a previous chapter, that we only promote the people who are good and just and hardworking and honorable, etc., without taking into account corruption and nepotism and bribery and all this other stuff. So really naive and just nonsense view of how this sort of thing works. Second time he said this now as well. It's not simply ability that leads to promotion, is it? Anyway, there is certainly a great deal of injustice in the world, in that there are many people whose real ability is never discovered. But it is hard to believe that promotions are more often made wrongly than rightly. So it is surely a justifiable claim that those selected for promotion are rather more likely to have superior qualities than those who are not so selected. Now, man, like every other animal, does tend to pass on his natural qualities to his offspring. There is no certainty about it, but there is a somewhat better chance than the sons of the promoted candidate will be abler than those of his unsuccessful rivals. Since there will always be need for as many able people as possible, the encouragement of the promoted man to have children increases the chance that we shall find them in the next generation. The argument may be pushed further still. There is a good deal of evidence that some men's ability is more intimately incorporated in their heredity than it is for others. Thus, there have been men of preeminent ability risen from the ranks, whose descendants have sunk back in a generation or two, whereas there are families where generation after generation goes on producing men of very good ability. Clearly, the probability of producing able men is rather greater in a family that has shown that it can do so over several generations. The argument that the eugenist rates the well-to-do highly is quite true if it is read in these terms, for the well-to-do are rather more likely than others to possess the quality of hereditary ability through having shown it in several generations. Note also that an opponent of this view does not really upset the argument by maintaining that the wrong people are always promoted. He wants other types to be promoted, presumably because he admires their qualities more, but then he will surely want those other qualities to be perpetuated through heredity. It is not the eugenic side of the argument that he wants to upset, but the social side. All these matters, both of achieving success and of heredity, depend, of course, very much on chance, for very often the sons of the successful are inferior to those of an unsuccessful rival. But there is no justification for neglecting chances because they are not certainties. After all, the whole world depends very much on chance, and it is the part of the wise speculator to recognize which chances are likely to make the odds most in his favor, and he will take these chances even if they are only slightly more favorable to him. If then I may appear to be regarding the actually successful members of society as more valuable than the less successful, it is not because I do not recognize that there are a great many stupid rich people, or that there are many of superior merit who have been missed. It is because I believe that I shall tend to find rather more ability among those, some of whose ancestors have proved they possessed it, and in dealing with probabilities, I want to have the chances in my favour as much as I can, even if the gain in the odds is not very great. In what follows, then, I shall be implying this train of thought. It would be too tedious to have to repeat it all the time. There is one further point to be made. The judgment by success is one between men competing against one another, and so it can only be applied when they belong to the same community. It provides no guide whatever to the respective merits of separate peoples, whether the comparison is made of the whole peoples or of individuals drawn from each at some corresponding level. Consider now the history of Britain since the Industrial Revolution. The large increase of population started in about 1800, and this signifies that the rigour of natural selection began to be erased at that time. There was still, of course, a great deal of infant mortality among all classes, but it was probably a good deal less among the well-to-do. though even theirs would be regarded as quite shocking by modern standards. Many of the poor led lives of oppressed squalor, and no doubt often lived not very far from the starvation level. But they did not actually starve, and anyone who could survive childhood had a nearly equal chance of himself having children, no matter from what rank he came. Any difference there was would still favour the prosperous, though to a less degree than before the Industrial Revolution. The situation had changed radically before the end of the 19th century on account of a variety of causes, of which the comparative importance is still in dispute. One was the greater insistence of public opinion on sexual morality, and another, probably the most important of all, was the growth of the practice of birth control. It might more doubtfully also be argued that the spread of comfort and the rise of living standards have provided pleasures to rival those connected with sex, but this is not very convincing, since it is certain that in other countries and at other periods of history, the growth of luxury has had the opposite effect. But whatever the causes, it is indisputable that the more prosperous members of the community are not producing their share of the next generation, so that selection is now operating against the prosperous. As an example, if the list of candidates is examined who are applying for any office of high or even mediocre importance, it will be found that something like 9/10 of them have either no children or one or two. Of course, if everyone had exactly 2 children and both these children married and had exactly 2 more, the population would be exactly steady. But as things are, it is a fair guess that in each 30 years of a generation, this part of our population is reducing itself to something between a half and 2/3. This signifies that within a century, there will at most be quarter as many people of this type as there are now. There will, of course, be some compensation by the rise from other levels, but, as I have pointed out, to found our hopes on them is to take a worse instead of a better chance. The whole thing is a catastrophe, which it is now almost too late to prevent. If what I have called the bribe of the motor car is what is needed to persuade the world to limit its population, then it is certain that the first countries to accept the bribe are committing suicide. This catastrophe must be a principal factor in the immediate future of our country, and as such, it concerns us more than anything in the distant future. But in this essay, I am concerned with the distant future, and not with the immediate troubles of our country. So here it only plays the part of an example of what happens when a country succeeds in avoiding the Malthusian threat of overpopulation. The tendency of civilized life to sterilize its ablest citizens is by no means confined to this country, but is the experience of nearly all countries which enjoy even a passable degree of prosperity. It is perhaps more marked now than ever before, but it has certainly occurred at other periods of history. For example, the earlier Roman emperors were continually in difficulty because of the extinction of the senatorial families, which were the class whose administrative ability had been so largely responsible for the creation of the Roman Empire. It would seem that, then as now, it was just those whose type was most needed who were the first to limit their families. Then, as now, the prosperity induced by civilization gave not merely a security of life that annulled the effects of natural selection, but it actually went in the opposite direction, in that the less valuable parts of the community became the most efficient in survival. Another example of the consequences of family limitation may be cited, but I do so only very tentatively because I have not been able to gather full information about it. Of the Polynesians, many lived in small, nearly isolated communities on islands, and these succeeded in developing a manner of life which seems to have avoided the harder features of overpopulation. It was done by the sanction of various rituals, and by social habits, not all of which we should commend, but that is no matter. On their first being discovered, they could be held up to the world as having solved the problem of how to live an idyllic life of Arcadian simplicity. But since then, it has been found that Arcadia cannot endure in a cold world. The Polynesians are not in the least inferior to other races in ability or intelligence, but they do not seem capable of competing against them in survival. Thus, in Hawaii, After the short span of a century, they are already very much in a minority compared with the newly immigrant Chinese and Japanese. Contrast this with the colonization of Africa, where the effect has usually been a rapid increase in the local population. Furthermore, the Polynesians themselves furnish one striking example to the contrary. When the Maoris came to New Zealand, they could expand into an almost unlimited area, and there was no need to limit population, and the Maoris have most certainly not gone the way of the other Polynesians. Through insufficient knowledge, I can only cite this example of the Polynesians very tentatively, but it does seem to show that a race adapted to limiting its population cannot compete against others which have not been similarly adapted. Those who are most anxious about the Malthusian threat argue that the decrease of population through prosperity is the solution of the population problem. Oh, there you go, that's Jordan Peterson's argument. They are unconscious of the degeneration of the race implied by this condition. Or perhaps they are willing to accept it as the lesser of two evils. They hope that we can gradually make prosperity worldwide, so that as country after country experiences it, each of them in turn will begin to diminish in numbers. Finally, we can all be comfortable together in an effortless world. It is conceived as an automatic, painless process, occurring naturally and spontaneously, and involving no compulsion anywhere. I shall come later to the long-term instability which will prevent such happenings, but there is also an overwhelming short-term reason to prevent it. There is simply no time for it to come about, because everything happens in the wrong order. What is required is the simultaneous existence of high prosperity, social conditions in which the economic disadvantages of parenthood are evident to nearly all classes, and some knowledge of the methods of birth control. Only under such conditions will the potential parent weigh the rival pleasures to be derived from a motor car or another child. Such conditions exist in some of the more prosperous countries and affect the more prosperous members of them, which may be quite a considerable fraction. In others, even among those possessing a high degree of civilization, the fraction affected is very small, and for the remainder there is no such inducement to a careful balancing of the advantages. Take the case of India. Of some 500 millions, it is doubtful if even 1% are at present in the appropriate conditions of prosperity, and it is not 1%, but at least 60% that is needed. For the rest, the population is increasing at a terrifying rate. As to the prospects of higher prosperity, the risks of local famines are already mitigated by good intercommunications all over the country, and not very much more can be hoped from this. Methods of agriculture can no doubt be improved in many ways, but it would certainly take a long time merely to teach these to an enormous number of people. And all the time the torrent of procreation continues, itself inevitably decreasing the standards of life. There is, so to speak, simply no time to make the people realize what a pleasant bribe a motor car is, nor for the matter of that is it likely that enough motor cars could ever be offered. There are many other parts of the world where the same thing is happening. The colonizations, mainly by the white races, have produced a security of life before unknown, with the immediate consequence of large increases of population, and these increases have automatically lowered the standard of life back towards what it had been previously. The first condition needed for spontaneous limitation itself destroys the chances of establishing the other conditions. There is still one point to be considered. I have been arguing that there is no chance of spontaneous limitation coming about because it takes too long, and yet it is even now being actually experienced in some countries. This fact might seem to demolish my argument, but I do not think there is any difficulty in meeting the point. The present era has been unique in that it has combined the wonders of the scientific revolution with the sudden expansion of the white races into vast, almost uninhabited regions. The consequence has been that for 2 or 3 generations, the Malthusian threat did really disappear. In spite of the secure conditions, man could not breed fast enough to catch up with the extending agriculture, and so the other conditions for spontaneous limitation could come into play. Before the first one, the condition of security had killed the chance of them. It would seem unlikely that similar conditions can arise again in world history, so that, in estimating future possibilities, there's little prospect that the Malthusian threat will again be overcome spontaneously in this way. In considering the possibility of the spontaneous limitation of populations, I have been regarding the subject in the manner prevalent, as arising from conditions like those we are experiencing here and now. But it must not be overlooked that there have been many epochs in the past, and perhaps there are cases in the present too, where children were not wanted, and where a more direct solution was found through infanticide. It was usually female infanticide that was practiced. This was presumably because the male was more valuable economically as a soldier or workman, but it was also more effective in limiting the increase in later generations. Infanticide is repugnant to all our present systems of thought. Well, for a second there I thought he was going to say it's repugnant to him, but no. And it is hard for us to conceive the state of mind of those who practice it, and so to estimate how it actually works out. It would seem rather likely that it would operate on a lower social level than does our present limitation, because the decision to destroy a newborn child must involve a great emotional crisis, so that it is not likely to be undertaken except in extreme conditions. It will not be the hope of a motor car, but the pangs of hunger that will bring it about. This form of limitation will hardly come into play in conditions of prosperity, and so it cannot be considered any help in maintaining prosperity. I have already suggested that the voluntary limitation of populations is an unstable process, whereas any process that is to come about spontaneously has simply got to be a stable process. Here, I use the term stability in its technical sense, which hardly differs from the popular sense, though it is a little more precise. Stability roughly signifies that, if the system under consideration gets a little above its average level, by that very fact a force comes into play to pull it back, while if it falls below, a force is evoked to raise it again. In this sense, the voluntary limitation of populations is evidently an unstable process, but the matter is so important that it may be well to illustrate it by an example. Something of the kind is being already experienced in parts of France, where the peasant population is not maintaining its numbers, but I do not want to be tied to demographic details which are not very accurately known or understood, and the argument is quite strong for it to be put in more general terms. The peasants of Province A are not reproducing themselves, with the result that the villages are only partly inhabited and that part of the land has gone out of cultivation. Province B, on the other hand, has an excess of population, and the land hunger of the bees will drive them into taking over the deserted houses, and into cultivating the neglected land, even though it will have been the poorest land that had gone out of cultivation. Some departments of France have in fact already been partly repeopled in this way from Italy. Now, if the immigrant bees retain their own customs, they will continue to increase in numbers in their new settlements, and in a few generations, the Province A will be fully populated, but now chiefly by bees. But it may be that in their new surroundings, the bees will feel the influences which led the A's to decrease, so that they too will start to decrease, and again, villages will be deserted and land will go out of cultivation. If this happens, there will be a fresh influx of bees, unless perhaps the Province B has by now also got itself into a state where its own population is decreasing. In that case, there will be a new immigration from a Province C which has an excess population. If the C's go the same way after immigration, then D's will come in, and so the process will go on, with a succession of immigrations, each of which may later fade out by experiencing the same decrease. But at some stage, one set of immigrants will come in who decline to decrease, and then the Province A will experience overpopulation. Thus, the state of underpopulation in the end inevitably cures itself. In a different sense, so does the state of overpopulation, for the overpopulation will inevitably reduce itself to a condition of exactly full population, either by emigration or by the starvation of the surplus. The only condition under which the final state of A would not be one of full population would be that there should be no single race on the whole face of the earth that was not stationary or decreasing. If there was a single one that resisted the bribe of the motor car, that race would people the earth, and this it would do whether its motive was high principle or some creed or simply pure stupidity. It is in this sense that I say that the avoidance of the Malthusian threat of overpopulation is bound to be an unstable process. I have already shown the short-term difficulties which seem to make it sure that no spontaneous process will avoid the menace of overpopulation. Is it possible that the statesmen of all countries, perceiving these dangers, should combine together to make and enforce a worldwide policy of limitation? It would have to be worldwide, because if any nation were recalcitrant, its population would increase relatively to the rest, so that sooner or later it would dominate the others. That the prospects of such a worldwide policy are not good is witnessed by the total failure hitherto achieved in the far easier problem of military disarmament. How would the nations settle the respective numbers admissible for their populations? The only principle that would have a chance of acceptance would be to base the numbers on existing populations, and then the question arises why one particular set of proportions between the various countries should be frozen constant for all time. Since the aim of the policy is to retain worldwide prosperity, every single country would be faced with the problem of taking care of its own limitation. And, as has been seen, this would not come about spontaneously. Even if a government could devise an effective method, it would be an odious task for the rulers to have to enforce it, and there can be no doubt they would often evade doing so. With the best of goodwill, it would be hard to enforce the limitation because of the gradualness of the increase, for the rulers could always excuse themselves by the argument that the slight illegal increase of this year was accidental and would next year be compensated by a corresponding decrease, so that action might be postponed, and sometimes it would be postponed too long. It is clear from all this that the world policy, would need to be supported by international sanctions. Yeah. And the only ultimate sanction must be war. War. All right. There you go then. War to keep the global populations down and in check and make sure we don't overpopulate the planet. But I think we all kind of knew that that's the purpose and the function of war, and that's how it's being used. Present methods of warfare would not be nearly murderous enough to reduce populations seriously. No, we need more murderous methods of warfare. And even so, they would take a nearly equal toll of victims from the unoffending nations. So after the war, the question would arise of how to reduce the excess population of the offending nation. It is not possible to be humane in this, but the most humane method would seem to be infanticide, together with the sterilization of a fraction of the adult population. So the most humane method would seem to be infanticide, together with the sterilization of a fraction of the adult population. Such sterilization could now be done without the brutal methods practiced in the past, but it would certainly be vehemently resisted. I have dwelt on these details, perhaps at unnecessary length, not because I believe they will ever happen, but in order to show that this kind of enforcement, which is the only obvious one, would lead to a condition of strife, jealousy, and disorder, which is precisely the condition that it was designed to avoid. The fundamental instability of population numbers cannot be checked by man-made laws, and even if it were successfully done, for a few years there is no chance of the system working century after century. Even worse difficulties, however, would arise. Even worse difficulties, however, would arise than those I have so far contemplated. I have been assuming that the policy of limitation was accepted by the majority on broad rational grounds, but it is quite certain that in a very short time it would encounter fanatical opposition. Even though the procreative instinct has not the violence of the sexual instinct, there's that linking again of the word violence with the sexual instinct. Yet it is an emotion possessed by many people, and as such it will be particularly liable to get incorporated in creeds. There are already creeds that maintain the wrongfulness of birth control, though there is at present no very strong emotion associated with them. But if there were to be any enforcement of birth control by authority, it is certain that many new creeds would spring up which would regard the practice as sinful, and the tenet would be held with an enthusiasm not to be overcome by the efforts of rational persuasion. There are many creeds which we hold to be unwise, which we can admit and leave alone, because their effects are mainly to damage their believers. This could not be one of them, since the believers would automatically gain an undue share of the next generation. Persecution would be the only recourse against such a creed, and the massacre of the innocents or the blood of the martyrs would water the seed of the faith. It is not, of course, true, as is sometimes maintained by religious devotees, that persecution always fails to extinguish a faith. For example, the Arian heresy was much persecuted by the Orthodox Church, and there are no Arians now. But there is no doubt that persecution is a great encourager, and it is fairly sure that not all such creeds would be extinguished. Once again, the effort to produce comfortable prosperity would call for a brutality that is just the kind of thing it is trying to avoid. It is not only the creation of creeds that may come into play to prevent the artificial limitation of populations. In the very long run, a deeper cause will arise to prevent it. Through natural selection, animals acquire heritable qualities which fit them to survive, but nature works in a very untidy way to achieve its ends, accepting any method, no matter how indirect it may appear to be, so long as it is effective in producing the result. Man has strong sexual instincts and strong parental instincts, but the procreative instinct, which would make him feel the direct want of children, is much weaker. This did not matter so long as the sexual instinct would ensure the birth of children, but now it is no longer doing so. Nature's untidy method has been defeated by the ingenuity of man. There will be a revenge. Though the procreative instinct is comparatively weak, it is present in many people, and it is these people who will have large families than the rest. By the very fact, they will hand on the instinct to a greater fraction of the population in the next generation. The process of building a new instinct into the species will certainly be a slower one than the operation of any creed, but it has a permanence possessed by no creed. That an instinct is a very much more powerful thing than any creed may be seen from the sexual instinct. There are many creeds which place the greatest importance on the virtue of chastity, but their prohibitions are seldom effective against the instinct. There is no need for the procreative instinct to become even remotely as strong as the sexual for it to defeat any opposing creed that favors limitation of populations, and so to perpetuate the overpopulation of the world. Once this stage is reached, nature will have taken its revenge, and there will be little tendency for the instinct to increase further. It is very much of a guess how long such a change will take, but it should be far less than the 1,000,000 years of the change of a species. Some analogous considerations, which I shall develop in the next chapter, suggest it might be something like 10,000 years. After all, for one thing, no very great increase is needed in an already existing instinct. And for another, the effect on population from it is so very direct. To conclude the chapter, I return to the narrower question of the tendency of civilization to eliminate its ablest people. This has happened in the past and is certainly happening now. And if it is always to happen, It signifies a recurrent degeneration of all civilizations, only to be renewed by the incursion of barbarians who have not suffered similarly. If any civilized country could overcome this effect, so that it alone retained both its ability and its civilization, it would certainly become the leading nation of the world. Man is a wild animal and cannot accomplish this by using the methods of the animal breeder. But may he not be able to devise something that would go beyond the long drawn-out automatic processes of natural selection? I think he can. A cruder and simpler method must be used than the animal breeders. Something might be accomplished on the line of what is called unconscious selection in the origin of species. Unconscious selection signifies that the farmer, who has no intention whatever of improving his herd, will naturally select his best and not his worst animals to breed from, and in consequence he will find that in fact he does improve the herd. As I have pointed out, we are all the time assessing the rival merits of individuals for promotion. They are each chosen for some special purpose, but like the unconscious selection of the farmer, the choice does mark the promoted person as being superior to the average. Any country that could devise a method whereby the promoted were strongly encouraged to have more children than the rest would find itself soon excelling in the world. It would only be a rough and ready method, with many defects. For example, from the point of view of heredity, women are as important as men, but it would not so often be easy to take their qualities into account. Furthermore, the method would be extremely subject to fashions, in which it would resemble the animal breeder's method, for at one time greatest value would be given to the arts, at another to military skill, and at another to administrative ability, and so on. However, ability is not usually a very specialized quality, and the effect would be to preserve high ability in general, and thereby to increase it. Since the abler people would be contributing more instead of less than their share to the next generation. Let me go and read that sentence again. I kind of didn't follow it properly. However, ability is not usually a very specialized quality, and the effect would be to preserve high ability in general, and thereby to increase it, since the abler people would be contributing more instead of less than their share to the next generation. A nation might consciously adopt such a policy, or it might be that an economic policy adopted for quite other reasons should have this unintended result. Whatever way it came about, if it could last for even a few generations, the effect would begin to show. But humanity is capricious and subject to the passions of the immediate present, and it is hardly likely that any country, whether democracy or autocracy, would follow such a policy long enough for it to really tell. The best hope for it to endure would be that it should become attached to a creed, and it would not matter very much whether the creed was reasonable or unreasonable, provided that it produced the effect. And that reminds me as well of the chapter on creeds where he says, I don't really care if the creed's true or not, let's just look at the effect that it has. Saying a similar thing here. Either ancestor worship or a belief in the sinfulness of birth control would at least place the promoted on an equality with the unpromoted, and with their superior ability, this would give them the advantage. But since the matter concerns the more intelligent, a reasonable creed would have a better appeal than a mere superstition. Such a creed might be one which inculcated in those who were promoted the duty of having more children than their fellows as an act benefiting the human race. The prospect of such a creed arising does not seem very hopeful, but if by its means any country can even partly solve the problem, it will lead the world, and it will be doing so through the method of unconscious selection. And that is the end of chapter 8. We are ripping through this book. That's page 154, and this only goes to 208. So we've only got 54 pages left now. Where's the, there? Here we go. Got to use a different bookmark because that one I put it in a puddle of condensation on my table over there, so it's damp. Okay. That chapter wasn't as I don't know, I kind of expected this book to be a lot more prescriptive. He's not really. I thought he might come out and say all sorts of crazy things about lowering the population and rolling out different methods of identifying who should breed and who shouldn't. But he's been fairly, what's the word that I'm looking for? He's been quite restrained in his prescriptions for what he thinks should happen and what, he's actually been fairly, the way he's analyzed it, he doesn't seem to be injecting too much crazy eugenic policy in there. Not as much as I was expecting anyway. A lot of observations. You can tell he's coming at it from a very logical, rational type of approach, point of view, I should say. And I was expecting something a little more like, whoa, I can't believe he said that. But I think he's kind of painting a picture and saying, I suppose it kind of reads like he wants to put these ideas in the book and put them in the reader's mind without backing them and saying, this is what I think we should do. Would you say that? Would you think that's fair? That's kind of how I'm looking at it. Okay. ESB has provided us with a definition of the word creed, which is formal statement of religious belief, a confession of faith. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it is interesting that he uses that word when he's coming from a fairly strictly scientific position, and isn't really tying in anything to do with morals, religious belief, faith. None of that stuff. He's not really entertaining that. Although he does advocate the use of creeds, and he does advocate the use of creeds we did a chapter. We read the chapter on that in part 4, and he said the reason that they're the best way to influence behavior is because they last much longer than the author. So the author dies, but the creed continues. So is he kind of suggesting there something like the use of creeds to manipulate populations and get them to do certain things, designing them, planning them, penning them, authoring them, and then handing them out to the populations in order to, mold the minds of the masses and have that social engineer type of influence on populations and groups? Possibly. Okay, let's review the YouTube comments. I think Lorthrop Stoddard was the last bit, wasn't it? Record Deepness says baby boomers called out. Yeah, I think this is to do with people having cars instead of children, right? Record Deepness, kind of weird that STD rates continue to rise despite all the third graders learning about sex ed. Yeah, strange that, isn't it? Almost like it's having the opposite effect. LJ, I wonder if he has ever worked. I wonder if he was ever in a proper working environment. It doesn't sound like it. Now, this sounds like the kind of guy who spent his whole life surrounded by the upper crust of society. I don't think he's a grafter. I think he's a thinker. Sit back, read books. A bit like me, really. Although I don't have any of the kind of royal blood connections that this chap has. Record Deepness says, but if types of people never became breeds, as with the Ptolemies, German nobles, and Brahmin caste, what's the worry? Yeah, he's not pushing alarmism in the same way. I thought he might be more alarmist in the way he's writing, but he's not really. Frank Lennon says, get together with your Galton wife and 9 months later you'll have a car. Record Deepness says, if you view abortion as a form of infanticide, you might say we've overcome that repugnance. Yeah, I think that's exactly spot on. Frank Lennon says, Darwin would be jumping with joy at the ways of the world today, everything mitigating against young couples marrying and having children. Yeah, that's really true. I have my own stories about that as well, but I won't go into them here. I'm getting a bit sleepy. We've got to sign off soon. Adam says it's surprising how telling this book is. Yeah, it is. It's a real insight into the mind of this class of person, right? Because he's truly looking at human beings as livestock, and how do you improve the stock, and how do you keep it under control, and how do you herd it and maneuver it and manipulate it to do what you want it to do, keep the numbers down and don't overpopulate. And he kind of, he's sort of trying to say, yo, look, we and us, and I'm one of you, but the tone, he doesn't do a very convincing job of that. I think the tone is quite clear that he sees himself outside of the general herds of humanity and of one of these managerial elite. That's what I think. Frank says, thanks, Nick. You are very welcome, sir. Thank you for your thanks. Thank you for your thank you. Record Deepness says, I think that's correct. It's more persuasive when you discuss these radical ideas as if they're already considered by rational experts. Yeah, it's the science. It's just what the science says. Well, we've got to stop you from having children. We've got to nudge you and use our behavior modification group, the nudge unit here in the UK, to manipulate your behavior without you knowing and against your will and without your consent for the good of the whole earth and the rainbow people, isn't it? Well, I think that is it for tonight's live stream. We've done 3 hours. Thank you all for hanging in there and being with me on this journey. It's been good. We're making really good progress. We will, if we don't finish it, we might even finish this on Thursday night stream. 50 pages. It might be a bit longer than usual, but let's have a quick look at the chapters that we have remaining. Okay, so it's actually interesting. There's a bit of a change to the layout here. So we did limitation of population, and we're on page 155, and we've got the pursuit of happiness next, and then we've got chapter 10, which is the history. Population, golden ages, science, economics, politics, civilization. That sounds like a very ambitious 30 pages. And I'm not sure what he means by the history. Not our history. Whose history? What does he mean? The single view of history? Probably not the revisionist history. Probably the consensus history that everybody needs to be given. But we might polish all this off in the next reading. It would be a shame to get halfway through that and have to pack it in. So we could give it a go. But until then, I hope you all have an enjoyable rest of your week. It's Tuesday, isn't it? Yeah, don't have much more to say, really. Just thank you very much for being here and checking in and leaving comments and thumbs up, liking, sharing, comment, subscribing, all that good stuff. You know what to do. If you enjoy the show, please consider having a look at allmylinks.com/HaysReviews. That is where you can find ways to connect with me. You can see what platforms I'm streaming on. You consider leaving YouTube because it is very heavy on the censorship and the shadow banning and the manipulation of the numbers. And there seems to be a lot more freedom of speech going on the other two platforms I stream to, which are Odyssey and Rumble. Consider if you want to make a donation, that would be most appreciated and very welcomed. Usually that money goes into improving the show, either buying books for the library or else getting little bits of hardware. I think the next thing I want to improve the sound quality. I've been listening to some of my videos and I've been watching other people's videos, and I feel like this I could probably do with upgrading my sound, because I have this mic plugged directly into the laptop by USB. But if you see here, it has one of these things, so it could go to a little amp thing. I don't know if it's called an amp. I'm not even sure what the name of it is, but a little thing that goes between this and the computer, and then we can make it sound a little bit sexier and nicer and smoother. So that might be the next investment. So yeah, if you're able and you're willing, it would be most appreciated. It will be invested back into the show. But more information on that at the All My Links website. Also, if you would like to join the mailing list to stay in touch, just in case I ever get deplatformed or whatever, then send an email, autonomoususername@gmail.com. I will send you a free gift, which is a bundle of original acoustic guitar music, 3 hours worth of tunes. There's some little hidden gems in there as well that you don't get to hear on the intro and outro to these streams. And also the last part is that I am very keen on talking to people about launching a Hayes Reviews online community. I've got some very good ideas about what this is going to look like and what I would like it to be, but it's not a one-man Nick tells you what to do in the community type thing. It's more of a, if you dig what I do on this channel and in this show and what I'm about, which is namely books and reading them and talking about them and teaching other people what's in them, and you want to get together and make something a little more like community-based, a little more interaction and back and forth and calls and book studies and sharing of what's in our libraries and the books we're reading, then shoot me an email, autonomoususername@gmail.com, and start a conversation. We can hop on a call and we can discuss that. I've got a call coming up with a good friend of mine from the Autonomy community this weekend where we're going to discuss what this might look like. So that's very exciting. And the aim is to get it launched by the end of the year. So I'm just going to keep saying that so you can be aware of it and I can be held accountable to it. And if you don't see it happen, then you can be like, Nick, what the fuck? You said you were going to do a community and it's not here yet. Dude. And I'll just hang my head in shame. But hopefully it won't come to that. Okay? So thank you all once again. It's really good to have you here. Hope that was good, useful, entertaining, fun, all that stuff. We will be back Thursday night for 7 p.m. and we will probably consider just blitzing the rest of the book and just get it done. 50 pages, so it'll probably be a longer one. I might not do a preamble ramble. Maybe we'll just start the stream and get straight into the book. Hammer it out. Let's see. I don't know. Anyway, take it easy. Take care of yourselves and each other. Be kind to the people you love and be kind to the people you don't. Pray for them and wish the best and want the best for everybody because we're all in this crazy situation together and there's a lot of wild stuff going on out there and it's hard to stay sane and calm and leveled out and mellow in the crazy times we're living in. But it is better to be that way than be panicking and stressing and all doom and gloom and everything, right? A lot of it is out of our control. So don't worry too much about things outside of your control. Look at what is inside your control, your habits, your routines, the way you interact with people, the way you interact with strangers. These little things, you can inject moments of appreciation and gratitude and kindness and patience and warmth and love and generosity and compassion and empathy and all these good things. You can do it on a small one-to-one basis. You don't have to change the world, right? But you can change the world around you that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. So that would be my advice for the rest of the week. I know you didn't ask for it, but you got it. So there you go. All right. So take it easy. And I will see you on Thursday. And until then, God bless.
Thank you.